regular meeting and council chamber in the City Hall on 401 California Avenue, Wednesday, July 22nd, 7 p.m. Pursuant to Section 3 of the Declaration of Emergency Directive 006, there will be no in-person attendance at this meeting. The public may view the meeting at the City Council website. Okay, items listed on the agenda may be taken out of order. Two or more items for considerations may be combined, and any item on the agenda may be removed or related discussion may be delayed at any time. I'd like to call the meeting to order. And at this time, I'd like to open up to public comment. And the number for public comment is 702-589-9629. That's 702-589-9629. Public comment during this portion of the agenda must be limited to matters on the agenda for action. If an agenda item is also listed as a public hearing, persons may wait to speak until after that particular item. Once again, the number for public comment is 702-589-9629. Susan, were there any written comments or emailed comments?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, there were not.
Okay. Should wait another minute. Seven 702-589-9629. Okay, I don't see any public comment as we move on with the agenda. Okay, for possible action, approval of the minutes of the June 24th, 2020 regular meeting. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
I'll move that we approve the minutes.
A second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Okay, that passes unanimously. For possible action, courtesy review of proposed roof sign at 550 Nevada Way.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At last month's meeting, the committee reviewed the proposed remodel of this building for Big T's Cantina. And unfortunately, we received the proposed sign design too late to get it in your packet last month, so it's coming before you this month for a courtesy review. It's technically not triggered as a required review by the committee because the adopted guidelines for the commercial buildings downtown relative to signs just simply encourages unique signs, and the sign proposed certainly is unique. However, it is coming as a courtesy review for the committee because, number one, it went to the Planning Commission last week for a variance to allow the sign to be on the roof, and we knew they'd want to know the opinion of the Historic Preservation Committee, and they were very concerned about that and recommended that the applicant consider whatever comments that the HPC might have regarding this. And then also the applicant might be applying for a redevelopment agency grant relative to the sign. And if so, the City Council is also usually interested in any opinion from the Historic Preservation Committee for properties within the historic district. So that being said, the applicant said he would be available by phone, so Michael can give him a call.
Mr. Chairman, do you have any, or does the committee have any initial questions for staff before we call the applicant?
Does anybody have, I have none. Does anybody in the committee have any questions for staff? No. Blair?
This is Tony.
Tony, this is Michael Mays with the City of Boulder City, and we are conducting the Historic Preservation Committee meeting. We have the committee here. I don't know if you had any initial comments, or you could just answer questions of the committee.
Okay, I'm answering any questions they have.
So, Tony, are you the Big T of Big T's Cantina?
I am.
Oh, okay, let's answer Tony. Thank you. Any comments, committee? I personally, I really like the sign. It's really a high-end sign. You have, like dimensional letters and the pieces of neon on the top there, which I think would qualify for an RDA grant. I believe so. But I think it's a great addition to the neighborhood.
Talking into your mic, thank you.
Okay. Traditionally in that, on the Browder building, there has been a series of roof signs like that, so I don't think it really takes away from any of the historical look and the character of the neighborhood, but I think it'd be a great addition to the neighborhood myself. Any other comments?
Hi, Tony. This is Blair Davenport. I have a question about the size or the height of the circle in the middle of the margarita.
Right.
How high is that sign?
40 inches, I believe. 40 to 48 inches. But I believe it was 40 inches.
It's 44 inches per the drawing in the packet.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a
Got it.
circle, so.
Got it. Okay. But and then the sign, where will it be placed on the roof of the?
So it'll be placed right on top of the column, so where the support of that patio cover is at. So it'll be, I think we're 14 or 16 inches of fascia that comes out of eave, so it'd sit back just about 16 inches or so. So it'd sit on that support.
Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That's all the questions I have.
Any questions or comments? Okay, thank you very much. Those are the comments that we have as a committee, and congratulations, and look forward to your opening, Tony. When do you?
Yeah, thank you.
When do you think that will be?
Gosh.
We're not going to hold you to it.
It's probably going to be November now.
November?
First part of November.
Well, best of luck to you, and you're doing some great work out there. So good luck.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, item. Oh, is there any other comments?
No, I just, Tony, thank you very much. We're going to hang up.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
I just didn't want to make comments with the owner on the phone. I really like his sign, but I just wanted to reiterate that part of one of the things I'd like to see in the future for the Historic Preservation Committee is to work with perhaps the Planning Commission to figure out what our role is in reviewing signs and maybe modifying the guidelines that are that are currently existing for signage in the downtown area. Mm-hmm. They're just really inadequate. So, or just add it to the list of all codes for historic preservation that need to be updated.
Well, I think we should have some.
Because I really think he could have gone ahead and put it on the roof. I find that really weird that there's not kind of already some guidance to allow roof signage without having to go through a variance process. And when you watch the Planning Commission's meeting, which I thought they did a pretty good job of figuring out, what their role was as far as addressing historic preservation versus, code compliance. But it just seemed confusing to them as well. So it'd be nice to somehow clarify the code as far as what the Historic Preservation Committee's role is in addressing signage in the historic district.
Well, I felt like, and I think in a way our role is, is to look at, as far as historically what's been appropriate or what's been there in the past. I mean, I think the uniqueness, the guidelines call out for, design, unique signs, also calls out for, it likes neon. I mean, actually, in the RDA, there's a special grant for just neon signage to encourage neon signage use in the downtown area or in the RDA area in general. Isn't that right, Michael? So I think that our role is to at least stylistically, and probably my first concern, at least from the historic point of view, was I was looking at the the historic photos in that area and just all of the fascia signs and parapet signs, and they were just really marked. They were much more direct in the early days, and it would say "eat" at Browder's, or what you would do, or it would give you a directional. But but a lot of those signage were on the roofs and everything, and I know in a lot of modern communities, contemporary communities, they kind of discourage any kind of signage. Whereas, in the past, and historically, our community had tons of little signs and directories and things like that. So, I mean, when I look at the signage, I look at it in terms of that context of, there used to be all kinds of signs, but it's not maybe the Planning Commission's role is more to determine how much and how big. And maybe our role is more stylistic, and has it been part of the, the look of the past?
I would think that that's our role too, as far as how big something is as it impacts the historic district. But one of the things that I see proliferating in the historic district is neon signage, and I love neon signage, but there wasn't a ton of neon in the downtown area. It was predominantly indirect lighting, so especially for the Browder. But so anyway, I'm just making a comment that it would be nice to clarify the guidelines for signage within the historic district, so that it doesn't have to go to the Planning Commission for a variance every time.
So we would just skip the planning, we would just skip the Planning Commission then? It would go through here and then not through them?
That's a good question, for staff, if it has to be codified, and if that, therefore, it's got to go. I don't know if it has to go before the Planning Commission or not, but.
Well, and the reason this was required to go to the Planning Commission is because our code prohibits roof signs. And so it needed a variance from that section of the code to be able to proceed. And so the Planning Commission evaluates the standards that are within our code relative to whether the variance is warranted in that situation. And so they're looking at it from that perspective. So if there was a future text amendment that allowed roof signage, then it wouldn't require review by the Planning Commission.
Okay, I understand now. Thank you.
Okay. Item number 3 for possible action, discussion about the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation, the city's role as a certified local government, CLG, community with Kristen Brown, architectural historian, State Historic Preservation Office.
Mr. Chairman, I know this committee has been very eager to be able to interact with SHPO since our designation as a CLG community. And even with the challenges of the pandemic, we wanted to make sure that there was an opportunity for you to hear from Kristen and be able to ask questions about your role as a committee overseeing CLG designation, and specifically with the Secretary of Interior standards. And so she's prepared a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation. A copy was emailed. Also, you have it in front of your on the dais in front of you. And I will call Kristen now, and she'll begin the presentation, and then certainly don't hesitate to ask questions along the way.
More connecting Christian. I can't think of a more important subject for us to kind of deal with than the Secretary of State's standards as we kind of move forward as a committee and the things that we're doing today.
Hello?
Kristen,
Yes,
it is Michael Mays. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you guys?
We are doing great. So I have the Historic Preservation Committee here, and we're loading your PowerPoint presentation as we speak, and then I'll just kind of let you kick it off, and the committee can ask questions along the way. And if you just want to let me know when to advance slides, that's how we'll handle the presentation. Does that sound good?
That sounds great to me, yes. Thanks everyone for having me. Sorry that I couldn't come in person. Tell me, are you ready?
We are ready. We have it up. So we're on.
Okay, cool. So first I'll introduce myself. My name is Kristen Brown, and I'm relatively new as CLG coordinator and National Register coordinator at the SHPO. However, I have worked here for over 4 years, and most of that time I was in a previous role. And before that, I came from the Texas SHPO. So I am familiar with all this kind of stuff, CLG, land, and everything else. So this first slide just kind of gives you an idea of some of the things the Historic Preservation Office does. We, of course, do the review and compliance for Section 106 and some of the other laws. We offer grants, both federal grants and state grants, and we help administer the Historic Preservation Tax Credit Program. We do National Register and State Register, of course, as well as survey and getting things put into our GIS-based database, which is called NEVCRIS. And then we also have an outreach program, which is, as you probably know, it's our site stewardship program, and that's based in our Las Vegas office. And we can talk any of those things that you have a question about later. I can certainly help answer it, but I'll hit on some of those as we go on. So, okay, let's go. Next slide. So just super basic info to start with, and I may move through some of the early slides somewhat quickly so that we can spend more time at the end talking about the Secretary standards. But I wanted to make sure to get this information out there so that you can hear it, and then also so that you can have it when you refer back to my PowerPoint as a reference. So the CLG program is basically a three-way partnership between the local government level, the State Historic Preservation Office, and the National Park Service. So you can click on. So you guys already know who you are. So the other two partners, we've got NPS, and National Park Service in our country is the agency that is responsible for historic preservation, including laws and activities related to preservation, including the National Register program, the federal tax credit for historic preservation, the grant money, and the grant money comes from the Historic Preservation Fund, but that fund also helps fund the state offices. And then NPS also oversees the entire CLG program. And then at the state level, we are designated as the State Agency for Historic Preservation, and that is set forth in the Historic Preservation Act of 1966, that we exist and we have certain role and rules that we have to follow, and then we have certain programs that we're required to administer. So we review state projects We provide guidance and education, and we do those grant programs I mentioned, and we administer the CLG program. And we then have some other programs that are more on the state level as well. So a little bit about preservation, why the local level of preservation is so important. So a lot of people hear National Register, State Register, and local designation, local landmark, local district, and they assume that the National Register must be the best one because it's national, right? Well, not to say that it isn't good. It's certainly great to have something in the National Register, but the National Register actually does not offer a layer of protection to the resource. One bonus to the National Register is that it does not impose any restrictions and change any property rights, and so that can be a selling point. But on the flip side of that, because it doesn't have any restrictions, it doesn't actually offer any protection. So a building that's listed in the National Register, if a private owner wants to tear it down or alter it, they can do it. If they're a private owner using their own money, they are able to tear down that building. So let's see, next slide. Let's see what the next slide is. So the greatest protection actually comes at the local level. And the reason for that is because governments can adopt, through their code of ordinances, they can adopt a preservation ordinance. And a preservation ordinance can vary hugely from city to city. And some people adopt a more lenient one or a more advisory one, and some people adopt a really strict one that has all kinds of steps that you must follow and that homeowners must follow and that kind of thing. But some of the types of things that a preservation ordinance can contain, it can contain information about how to designate local landmarks and local historic districts. An ordinance can set out the ability to have design guidelines that are required for use in certain neighborhoods. An ordinance can, well, most ordinances do include the language of how to create the review board or commission and what that membership would look like and how many times they meet and what their responsibilities are. An ordinance can require that a certificate of appropriateness is issued to any building owner that wants to make a change. An ordinance can offer incentives for preservation, such as tax freezes or the like. An ordinance often is good because it can build in a review process where the public has a chance to comment and where there's an appeals process and maybe it gets elevated, a case gets elevated and it goes up to the level of city council or what have you. It sort of buys time for some groups to become involved and take action. Or if, like I say, some ordinances, like your own, are more on an advisory level, and that can be really valuable too, because it gives you the opportunity to provide guidance to building owners. Okay, next slide. So the Certified Local Government Program, what are some of the benefits? Why would a city want to become a CLG? Well, it's because you have certain things that are available to you once you're a CLG. Certainly technical assistance and training that that you can call us at any time and that will help you. That's valuable. We also, of course, have the grant program through that Historic Preservation Fund, the CLG grants. The CLG program, since it does involve the community and, in order to create a preservation ordinance and get it passed through with the city and get it approved and listed into the code, you do have to do some legwork there, and that would usually involve different members of the community and elected officials, so it often can help get local support going and some enthusiasm. There's an opportunity to network with other CLGs across the country. We have a listserv. Well, I don't have a listserv. The National Alliance of Preservation Commissions has a listserv. CLGs can share ideas or ask questions. And then, of course, along with that comes the forum conference that happens every 2 years. So that's a great opportunity for networking and training. And then CLGs are included in the National Register process for any buildings listed within their jurisdiction, and CLGs are also included in the Section 106 process for federal undertakings, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Any questions yet? Okay, so next slide. I'm not going to read this whole slide, but this is almost verbatim the text of the CLG agreement document that the city of Boulder City has to sign in order to become a CLG. And the agreement document sets out what Boulder City agrees to do. So essentially, this is, in a nutshell, the requirements for being a CLG in our state. So pass an ordinance, designate a representative at the government to be the staff liaison, provide for adequate public participation, maintain you guys, the Qualified Preservation Commission, attend training events, maintain a system for survey and inventory of historic properties, utilize the Secretary of the Interior standards during your reviews, and then supply to us some basic documentation on an annual basis and having your records available for us upon request, just keeping good files basically. And then the last one is simply to maintain, it's basically saying you should maintain your status, you should follow the handbook, follow the guidelines, because you need to do that year to year or else you'll lose your privileges. So that's the requirements for being a CLG in Nevada. So the next slide kind of talks just a few extra things that kind of go hand in hand with that previous slide. We do have the CLG handbook. I have some updating to do. So like I say, I'm new to this program here, and I've already found some things that I would like to update just a little bit. But the handbook is a really valuable tool, and it's on our website. And it is very comprehensive, and it talks a lot about your role and some of the annual type things that occur, or some of the reporting, or some of the helpful hints and that kind of thing. So definitely, if you're not already familiar with the handbook, I recommend looking through it. Like I said earlier, there's annual reports. They're quite simple. You're just basically tabulating your activities for the year, how many reviews you did, how many recommendations you issued, how many meetings you held, that kind of thing. A new responsibility that just happened this week or last week is that we decided that we are going to have the commission submit their agendas before the meeting to us and their minutes once the minutes are compiled. So that's going to go into the handbook. You're required to maintain and update as needed your roster of members and provide that to us. And then on our end, we agree that we will do a review of your program at least every 4 years. That's one of the requirements that we have from NPS. And then, of course, you have to follow open meeting laws, which you have to do anyway, of course. Okay, so the next slide. So what is your role during a meeting? What are you supposed to be doing while you're sitting there? Well, you probably would have received your packet for the reviews in advance, but during the meeting is a good time to study the drawings and the proposed scope of work together as a group. Normally, you would have received a staff recommendation from Michael. Sometimes, you can discuss that or consider that staff recommendation. As you study the drawings and you start to have your discussion, the key thing that you're trying to do is you're trying to review all of the proposed changes to the building against those Secretary of the Interior standards. If you were in a city that had design guidelines that were tailored to a certain neighborhood or a certain zone of your city, then you would also have to review those proposed changes against those design guidelines. So if you feel the packet does not have enough information, or if you feel that there are some changes that need to be made, then you can ask for more information for a future meeting to be discussed. And then, depending on how an ordinance is written, a commission would either approve the changes, deny the changes, and of course, then they have to cite why, they have to explain their decision. Or if an ordinance does not have that sort of review authority, then you would provide the recommendations to the building owner at the end of the discussion, or however you guys, if you write them or however you do it, then you would provide those recommendations. So the last point is just something to keep in mind. We try really hard to not make these reviews a case-by-case basis. We try really hard to use the Secretary of the Interior standards. And although they do have some gray area, they are quite clear and they are able to be applied to a wide range of building types. So you really need to use those as your lens while you're looking at these projects. So any questions about that? Okay. So let's go to the next slide, and I want to talk just a little bit about Section 106 review, because it's probably something that you have already seen, or if not, that you will see at some point. So if you're not familiar with Section 106 already, basically in a nutshell, back to that National Preservation Act of 1966, Section 106 of that act requires federal agencies to consider effects to historic properties. Now, that can be all kinds of different reasons. Why would that be triggered? Well, it would be triggered if it's a federally funded project, or if it needs a federal license or a federal permit, or if it's a project to a building or some land that's owned by the federal government. So if it's a national forest or BLM land or something like that. So they need to consider what undertaking or project they're doing, consider what the effects of that project might be, then look to see if there are any historic or cultural resources nearby that could be affected. And if there are cultural resources nearby, then they need to assess whether there's going to be an adverse effect or not an adverse effect to that resource. So part of their responsibility while doing this Section 106 is a lot of consultation and outreach to interested parties. The regulations for Section 106 state that the federal agency needs to consult not only with my office, they need to consult with the local government, they need to consult with the general public, with the Native American tribes, and they need to consult with any other interested party, such as a preservation nonprofit or a neighborhood association or whatever is deemed an potentially interested party per their undertaking. So they are required by law to be reaching out to all of those groups and sending them information about their undertaking and inviting comment and participation. And the vast majority of federal undertakings, nobody ever wants to enter into consultation with that agency. They just get a letter, or they get it, they get something, I don't know, normally it's a letter. The general public might just have a little notice put in the newspaper, or it might be flyers in a website or whatever, depending on the undertaking. The vast majority of the time, nobody ever steps up and says, yes, I would like to participate in this project, in this process. But every once in a while, if it's a high profile deal, or if it's affecting some really significant resource, then some interested parties do step up and they would like to provide some comments or become involved. And so the local government, like I said, the local government is required to be notified. On my end, I do my best when I do these Section 106 reviews, and everyone in my office does. We always remind the federal agency of their responsibilities for consultation. But we do even more of a job of doing that if the local government also happens to be a CLG, because we feel that the CLG communities are really in a good place to be able to comment on historic properties in their neighborhood or in their area, because they already care about historic preservation and they have a commission in place that, that's their responsibility. So now a lot of federal agencies are not necessarily very good at figuring that out. They might just send a letter to the county clerk or a letter to the city manager, and then it gets perhaps buried on a desk somewhere.
Kristen, we have a question from the committee.
Okay, please.
Hi, Kristen. This is Alan Goya, the chair of the committee.
Hi.
Just a question. So it's incumbent upon the agencies to report it to the local government. We're adjacent to Lake Mead National Recreation Area. So is that within our jurisdiction, or is that because it's not in the city limits, it's not in our jurisdiction? So if they do something in the park, it has nothing to do with us?
So that's a great question. I guess the answer would be it depends, because it depends on what the undertaking is. So, well, obviously, if they're doing something to their building that's right in the middle of your downtown, then yes, that would certainly require, that would be in your jurisdiction, because I know they have offices down there. But if they're doing something out at the lake, it kind of depends on what we call the area of potential effect. So if their undertaking is very small and limited to, putting a new roof on a bathroom or something, then their area of potential effect is going to be quite small, and they would probably decide that they did not need to do a lot of outreach because they didn't think there was going to be any interested parties. But if their undertaking involves some more significant historic resources, then they might reach out to some local preservation groups or historical societies, the general public who might care about those historic resources. But then if their undertaking involves, their helicopter flight pattern and it goes right over your downtown, well then, yes, they should be telling you guys as well. So it kind of depends. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Absolutely. You're welcome.
Hi, Kristen. This is Blair Davenport. How are you?
Oh, hi. I'm great. How are you?
Good. I had a question regarding Section 106. Does the SHPO assist in determining if Section 106 is perhaps applicable? What I'm getting at is that oftentimes, I think, well, maybe it's not often, but at times the city receives funding by way either directly or perhaps third party, or they hire contractors who receive funding for projects, for federal funding, I should say. An example would be federal highway funds that are trickled down to the RTA.
Sure.
And therefore, is that considered a federal
Yes.
project that
Yes.
triggers 106? Okay.
It is. If federal highway money ends up being used for streetscape improvements or something like that in your town, then that is absolutely a federal undertaking. And it is the federal agency's responsibility. However, sometimes they delegate some of that responsibility to whoever receives the funds. But ultimately, it's the federal agency that's on the hook for that responsibility if their delegate is not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So it is your right to speak up if you feel that there hasn't been adequate consultation done. It's absolutely your right to speak up because you are part of the process. Does that answer your question?
It does. And so a follow-up to that is that's direct funding from a federal agency. But what about when a federal agency directs a local government or a state, I guess, agency to take on responsibilities, such as EPA passing on standards that the state has to take responsibility for when it issues, air quality permits and that kind of thing?
Right. So that's a good question. So generally, yes, because we do work with a lot of state agencies that receive federal funds. We work with NDEP for some of their projects. We work with NDOT. We work with state parks because they get NPS money sometimes, and so on. So generally, the federally funded project is generally 106. However, there are some instances where, depending on what they're actually doing, it might not meet the definition of an undertaking pursuant to regulation. So if it's a planning project and it doesn't actually touch any historic buildings, or you never know, it could be a planning project, or it could be some other project that doesn't meet the definition of a federal undertaking, or it could also sometimes be a much larger project that has been phased in the past and maybe has some kind of programmatic agreement in place that kind of just lets them streamline certain steps. And so it's not always clear at first glance if what level of Section 106 consultation they might be required to do, but it's certainly worth asking.
Is that something that the SHPO's office assists with? Because sometimes they have access to those agreements or those MOUs.
Yeah, so at the very least, you could reach out to us and ask, we're in the process of hiring, so I was doing 106, for the last several years, and we're slowly but surely in the process of replacing me in that role. So I'm pretty soon not going to be the right contact for that. But our deputy SHPO, Robin Reed, might be a good contact for that. And even if we can't answer the question, we might be able to at least put you in touch with the appropriate agency contact that you can talk to.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kristen, it's Michael Mays again. And I
Okay.
guess so that we're all on the same page and coordinating and with some of these like state projects that may be receiving federal funds, by the time the local jurisdiction becomes aware of it, it's well underway. So how do we find out well in advance so that there is an opportunity where the input would be important to be able to have that process early on?
So you should not be hearing about it that late in the process technically, because so I'm wondering if there's got to be a breakdown in communication at some level, because the Section 106 regulations require that the entire consultation process is complete from beginning to end before a single shovel can hit the ground. So normally the federal agencies reach out and do their consultation effort way in advance. We're talking a year or 2 years in advance sometimes of these projects. Now, how good of a job they did with their consultation, I do not know. So some federal agencies might have forgotten to do that step, or some might have just sent a basic form letter that doesn't have a whole heck of a lot of information to a general post office box at the city government, and it ended up on somebody's desk that doesn't know what Section 106 is and doesn't know who's supposed to have it, and they stick it in a file. It could be either of those things. So it's kind of one really good step that you could take would be to reach out to other people that work at the city and to really start spreading the word. I don't know, maybe even the mailroom, hey, you guys got to be on the lookout for these type of letters because these need to come to me. So that would be definitely one step, because all that stuff should be posted, even like I say, for the general public as well. And then our office, when we get the consultation, if we don't see a summary of consultation efforts in the federal agency's transmittal letter or in their report, if it does not outline what they did for their consultation effort, we immediately send them a letter back with that explicit question. We remind them that that's their responsibility, and we ask them to please send us a summary of their consultation efforts. So all of those letters where we continually remind them, they're all on file at my office, which is, of course, all public record. Now, figuring it out of which ones you might need to pull would be laborious, of course. But I don't know. Maybe that's something that we'll have to brainstorm some more. Maybe I can talk to Robin about that, see if she has any ideas.
I had one other comment. Is that what triggered reclamations? Which is ongoing with their landscape requests. They're talking about redoing the landscape up on the hill there, and they've had a series of meetings consulting with us, the Historic Preservation Committee. Was that triggered by the 106 review? Then I would assume that's.
Yes, that would be an example of an agency doing a really good job with their consultation with the local government, because that is a Section 106 undertaking.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let me write this down, then I'm gonna ask a couple people at the office for ideas of how you can stay up to date. Maybe another idea could possibly be for us to help you figure out what types of undertakings are the most common that might happen in the city, whether it be things like streetscapes or cell towers or HUD money to fix up a building, or what would be the most common things that you would see, and then maybe we could provide you with some contact information to the individuals that we know that you could reach out to and just say, hey, we really want to make sure that we're involved. That could be a simple thing to do as well.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Yeah, that'd be very helpful.
So Michael, maybe you and I can talk about that soon. Remind me if I don't talk to you about it soon. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So this is just some ideas of what you guys can be doing, not just your formal role in the day-to-day business, but just some other things that you guys can be doing in your community. So survey, like I said earlier, survey is part of the CLG requirement. You can draft new ordinances. You can research ordinances. You can, try to advocate for different components to be added to your ordinance. You can, of course, designate local landmarks and local districts and maintain your survey and listed register, which is, again, part of the CLG requirements. You can help, this is also part of your requirement, assist in appropriate design and implementation for resources, streets, and route markings. So in other words, become involved in this process. Advise and assist building owners or the public or any agencies that are interested in or dealing with historic resources. You can write your own National Register nominations, or you can hire consultants to write them and submit them to my office. You can review and comment on nominations. So this is that other perk that I said was part of the CLG program, is that you are formally written in to the National Register process. So when my office gets a draft National Register nomination and I review it and provide my initial feedback to the author, once we get it to a good place, then I am required to send it out to a number of different parties for comment. Most of the time, we send it out to a city or a county and whatnot, and they don't even respond. The CLGs, however, not only do they, actually schedule a discussion at their next meeting, but they are also afforded 60 days to review it instead of 30 days like everyone else. So we really want your feedback on those draft nominations before they go to the State Board of Review. And the same is true for the state register nominations. So you can take it upon yourself to recognize buildings or individuals by some sort of plaque or even interpretive panels or what have you. You can assist with the drafting the next master plan for the city and develop the chapter on preservation. You can do public outreach and education programs. You can start doing some goals for short-term and long-term for your city, which kind of goes along with the master plan. You can help write grant applications for not just our office's grants, but really any grants that you find. You can scout commission training opportunities like the NAPC camp training, for example, or the one we're doing right now. And you can promote, this is a good one, you can promote among building owners in the city, promote the federal historic preservation tax credit program. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so the next slide. As you know, we have these CLG grants. They're available annually. The National Historic Preservation Act says that a minimum of 10% of Nevada's federal allocation has to go to the CLG program. So this is a great way that we can do it, is by offering these grants. It's a matched grant, a 60-40, and you have to it's a matched reimbursement-based grant, so you have to spend the money and then get reimbursed. And your 40% match can be either cash or in-kind contributions, like volunteer efforts. And then we have a grant manual for the grant program that's pretty lengthy and has a ton of information, and it changes ever so slightly from year to year. So what we do is we just post the most recent version of the grant manual at the beginning of the grant cycle. Any questions about that? Okay, so the next slide just kind of gives you an idea of some of the things that the grants can fund: survey efforts, nominations, outreach, creating design guidelines, hosting a training, doing some other type of preservation planning effort, brick and mortar, actual work to a building, and even acquisition. So the next slide.
Kristen, can you kind of talk
Yes.
about the typical funding each year and the level of participation by the CLG communities? Just
Sure.
so that we have an understanding of the total dollars and how they're utilized each year.
Absolutely. And I realized that I should have created a slide for our other grant program too, because it is relevant to you guys. So the CLG grants, it isn't a huge amount of money, and the individual grants are not huge. And I hesitate to even guess because I have not been involved in the program that long at all, and I haven't really been involved in the previous grant cycles in the state. But I do know that they range from, pretty low amounts of money, 10, 20,000, up to maybe, I don't know, 50, 60,000. I mean, they're not huge grants. They're better spent in planning projects like survey work, nominations, that kind of thing. They wouldn't go far for a brick and mortar project. They might go for hiring an engineer to come out and do a study for seismic rehabilitation of a building, but they're not going to pay for the actual seismic rehabilitation. And so, and then in terms of the how competitive they are, generally, I think in the last number of years at our office, they have not been particularly competitive, and not every CLG applies for a grant every time. And so there are years where we might only get a couple of applications, and then there are years where we get a number of applications. And so it's very difficult to tell. Whenever there is an NAPC Forum conference coming up, we always set aside money for travel and registration to reimburse folks to go to the forum. It's such a valuable opportunity for training. But in years where there isn't a forum, all of the money goes for regular grants. And so I'm kind of answering your question, but I'm also kind of not answering your question, I know. I think a lot of the past grants are on our website, and if they're not, I can pull, if you really are burning with curiosity, I can certainly pull those files, and I can give you a brief summary of maybe the last 4 or 5 years worth. But yeah, they're not huge grants, but they're good for preservation planning activities.
Yeah, I guess for the benefit of the committee as well as the public, just kind of understanding the general dollar amounts, I believe this last year it was approximately $80,000. That's just an estimate, and there are currently 6 CLG communities, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and then, right, exactly. And sometimes we'll get a nomination for not a nomination, but a grant application for a very simple one from somebody who wants to just do one little thing. Hey, we want to restore these front doors on this building. Okay, great, that's easy enough. And then so maybe the money will go farther, and then maybe a different year we happen to get a couple, but they're both enormous asks, and then we have to really struggle, and we might not be able to give them everything they even asked for. So it kind of, it varies quite a bit.
Kristen? Oh, sorry.
Just to clarify, Michael, we have already received grants. What is the amount of the grants that we have received already since we've started this program?
So since we became a CLG community, we took advantage of the first year, which was last year, to apply for and receive $33,000 to hire the consultant Northwind to conduct the update to the Janus report, which is currently underway. In this year's round of applications, we applied for both money for attendance, online attendance at the national conference, and that's what I've reached out to the committee before on. It's $100 per person to register and to be able to view the sessions online, and so we received that funding for this year. In addition, with the training we're looking at and received funds to be able to bring in a group to help with education to the committee and the public next calendar year, and received SHPO funds from that.
Perfect. Those are really, that's money well spent.
Kristen, this is Blair. I had a question about the CLG grants. Is there a season, I guess, for applying for those grants? Like deadline, what are the deadlines and?
It is kind of, let me see if I can find that information on our website. It kind of does go in a pattern. I don't think it's perfect every time because it depends on when we get the money. But let me see if I can find any clues here.
And a second part to that question, once we know what those deadlines are, or what the schedule is, for other CLGs, whether it's in Texas or Nevada, is that information passed on to the commissions, and then the commissions work with city staff who are funding or applying for those grants to come up with, like, I guess, some priorities for how that, for applying for grants?
So you mean is the information about the deadlines and whatnot passed on?
Well, there's the deadlines, yes, but also if there's knowledge of a commission that there's these CLG funds, who decides which projects should be applied for?
Okay, so yes and no. So, by the way, I just glanced at our website, and it looks like the last one we had set aside originally we had set aside $35,000 for forum travel. Well, now most of that we're not using, of course, so we're going to have to have a new round of grant applications to spend whatever we don't use, which is going to be most of that. Then we had a second dollar amount of $50,000 for fiscal year 20, and that was for planning and National Register nominations and other types of grants. And it looks like they were due in March. Let's see. Yeah, they were due in March. So that gives you a general idea. Spring, I would imagine, and then the grant scoring process, and then the grant hearing, or I'm sorry, not a grant hearing, that's a different, that's our other grant that I'm going to tell you about next. But we would have a public meeting basically for comment, and then we would award the money probably in the early summer, I would imagine, or late spring. So that gives you a general idea, and again, it might differ. But in terms of notifying, yes, what we do is we send out an email. I will be sending out an email to Michael, basically, to the representative from HCLG, announcing that we have posted the new fiscal year's grant information on our website, and here's the grant manual, and here's the link, and this is when they're going to be due, and let me know if you have any questions. And then so we spread the word directly in that manner, but then we also have it always up on our website with a clear instruction and due dates. So in terms of your own priorities, I would say that you as the commission should certainly be involved in that discussion of what your preservation priorities are and what your money should be used for in your community. And that could be an agenda item to discuss at your meeting, and then you could even assist with the grant application itself if you had time and expertise. So is that kind of what you were asking?
Yes, it was, exactly. And is that federal fiscal year or state fiscal year schedule?
So, gosh, I'm assuming it's federal fiscal year because it's a federal grant, and we're just the kind of pass-through. Okay. The fiscal year monikers always confuse me. Like, it was like, we're working, oh no, that's the 18 grant, no, that's the 19 grant. And it's difficult for me to keep it straight, but that's because I haven't really done this yet. I haven't gone through a couple of these grant cycles in this program yet to really get the hang of it. And then the other thing that sometimes introduces confusion is when we have to reissue invitation, we have to kind of open it up for new grant applications in a second round, like we're going to have to do this time when the forum, in-person forum canceled. That $35,000 that we intended to spend is now, I mean, we're probably only going to spend a couple thousand of that now. And so we have all that money left over. So we're going to have to be opening a second round, and it'll be, because each of these grant cycles last about approximately 2 years from start to finish. And so the second round of the FY20 grants might be occurring at the same time as a different grant cycle is beginning for all, so it gets all kind of overlapped. So I can't really help you a lot with that yet. Soon.
Kristen, if I could just clarify a couple of points based on my understanding of the grants, and also with committee member Davenport's query about the role of the committee with the grant application process. So it's my understanding, based on having to fill out the documentation for several grants now, that one of the obligations of the jurisdiction is that we are making a commitment to funding the project. And I believe there's even an affidavit that we have to sign to that effect. And so the challenge is anything that we're applying for funds for, the city has already committed through the budget process to paying for. And so it would be difficult to have a community say we want to fund project X if we haven't gotten city council approval yet for those funds, because we are making that commitment. And so I think the best way that the committee helps to guide that process is through the goals that the committee has established. And that's what staff has been utilizing for guidance in our budget proposals to the city council each year. The Janus update survey was a perfect example of that, as well as the committee's request for additional training opportunities, which we then incorporated into our proposal to the city council for the budget for this fiscal year. And then through that approval by the council, then we're able to apply for the CLG grant funds and can make that commitment that the city will fund that project because the council has approved that funding. So I think that's,
That makes sense.
yeah, I don't know if you have anything more, Kristen, to comment on that.
No.
Okay. And I don't know if the committee has any additional thoughts, but I mean, with the goals that the committee has established, you have set the action items that you want to accomplish over the next several years, and that's giving the roadmap to staff in how to move forward and looking for opportunities to leverage the CLG funds to accomplish those goals.
Yes, that makes sense. I hadn't considered that angle. Okay, should we do the next?
So, survey, are we at the survey now?
Yes, so a survey, we really have to dwell on this one. You know what a survey is. You're doing one right now. So you're surveying to, if you did, instead of a survey update, if next time you wanted to do a survey of a previously unsurveyed part of town, the goal would be to identify, to record what you have a record of it in this place and time, and then also to make some recommendations for identifying new designations. Are there any potential local designations or historic districts present? So that's your survey.
Can I get one clarification? How often, so we're taking our survey right now, when is our next survey due? When do we recommend to do our next survey? Is it 20 years or 10 years? I forget the number.
Are you asking, who are you asking?
I'm asking you. Are we supposed to re-survey this every 10 years? Is that what they would like in an ideal world? Was it 10 years?
So, not exactly. Yes and no. So I think my understanding anyway is that the requirement in terms of the requirements of CLG program, is simply that you remain active in surveying and inventorying your resources. So that can be interpreted different ways, and it doesn't have it doesn't have a number necessarily affixed to it. It just means that you need to have a program for surveying your historic resources, even if it means you as a team do it yourselves and you just go and take some photos and record some buildings and map them every once in a while. That's fine to keep it going. And then every few years, maybe you could get a grant to do a little more formally, right? Now, in terms of the 10-year cutoff, that is sometimes people do talk about that in terms of when a survey is no longer considered recent. After a certain length of time goes by, a survey is kind of gets stale because we don't then know if any buildings have been altered or torn down in the interim, or if some buildings have been fixed up or what have you. So at some point, a survey is not recent anymore and the data can't be trusted. And so a lot of times we'll just kind of use that 10-year mark to say if the survey is older than that, it might need to be the neighborhood might need to be revisited to make sure the survey is still accurate. And maybe the survey is still accurate. Maybe you realize that only a couple of buildings have been changed. Well, then that wouldn't be a good candidate to spend a bunch of money on the survey update. But it's it's a little bit of a milestone in our minds for that. I think that's really the gist of it.
Okay, thank you.
Is that?
Yes.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you.
So the last slide in this section, wait, before we go to the last slide, let me just say a thing really quick. Like I say, I forgot to make a slide about our CCCHP grant program. And this is not a CLG related thing. This is just a historic building related thing. So be aware that we do have a state grant program called CCCHP, and it stands for the Commission for Cultural Centers and Historic Preservation. And it's a bond-funded program that is every 2 years, and it is a much larger pot of money than the CLG grants. And it is very useful for funding those brick and mortar projects that have a high price tag. So those projects have to go toward government-owned buildings or nonprofit-owned buildings, and the building has to be used as a cultural center or museum or something of the kind. So it's the rehabilitation of a historic building for use as a cultural center that's either publicly owned or owned by a nonprofit. So just be aware that that program exists, and that it might be relevant for a city property or for one of the nonprofits that operates in your town. Any questions about that one?
Yes, what is the what is the amount of that grant in general?
So this year is a little bit different because it's really big this year. It's something around $3 million this year. Mm-hmm. Normally it's not that big. During the recession, it was on pause, and there was at least 1 year where it didn't happen. And then it did happen for the last several grant cycles again, and then this last one was really big. We have been inquiring if, due to the budget problems with the state, if it's expected to go through this fall when the bonds are sold. And the word we've gotten so far is that it is on as planned, pending any other disasters. So I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that the economy will remain in a place where 2 years from now, when the news cycle begins, that we will be able to do it again. And I don't know if it's going to be as high of a dollar amount next time. It might go back down closer to the 2 million mark, which I think is more common. But it's a lot of money, and it means people can get larger awards.
Kristen, this is Blair. Do you have information about this grant on your website?
We do, yes. And if you need more information, you can reach out to me.
Okay, thanks. And then the second question, does it only apply to individually listed properties on the National Register? Or
No,
okay.
No, they don't actually even have to be listed like they do for the CLG grants. They have to be historic and somewhat important, but more importantly is their use as a cultural center.
I'm sorry, you were garbled. I didn't catch that.
They do not have to be listed. They just have to be historic and used as a cultural center.
Oh, thank you.
Sure.
And Kristen, it's Michael. You said it's tied to bond sales this fall, so when would the next round of applications begin?
So let's see. Let me think. It's all fuzzy because it was all during the lockdown this all happened. I think that the applications were due in the winter, and then the grant hearing was in the spring, and the awards were maybe in April. And right now is when, right as we speak, are when the recipients are finalizing their scopes of work and their budgets based on their award amount, and they got to get them to our office in the next, say, month or two, I think. And then once we're all comfortable with that, then their funding agreements will be written and signed at the end of the summer for a release of bonds in the fall. I think that's how it goes. So I'm thinking that the applications were due approximately, maybe say January of 2020. So if all goes according to plan, it would be 2 years after that for the next application period to begin.
Because I don't recall ever seeing anything as a CLG community regarding this grant opportunity.
So, yeah, so that has been a grant program for as long as, for, you know, a couple decades. So it's kind of just a cyclical thing. And I don't know why that you guys weren't told about that back when you first started working with our office, but it's definitely, it's out. We try to push it out there to as many of our preservation partners as we can, but it's yeah. I mean, sorry about that. I guess I just assume that all the CLGs know about it because they've been working with our office prior to me coming in, you know. But we can certainly make sure that you get the notice next time, and it's on our website too.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I know that there's been a transition period with you coming on board with your role. So, but certainly any information you could provide that'd be very helpful.
Sure, I'll write that down.
Yeah, this is Blair again. I had a question about, is it just for brick and mortar, or can it be used for planning efforts for brick and mortar?
Totally. It can be used. It's not just for brick and mortar. But it's not, it has to be used, you know, to make a building into a cultural center. So it wouldn't be appropriate really to use it for a nomination or something, because that's not really related to turning it into a cultural center. But it could certainly be used to hire an architect or an engineer to develop some drawings, or to hire, or to, you know, do some architectural conservation on say there's a steeple that needs to be reconstructed or something sort of very specialized that needs to happen. It can also be used for things like sound systems and lighting systems if you have a theater that you need to make into a theater again, or something like that. So it's related to turning the building into a cultural center.
And would that include, I mean, it sounds like you're talking about historic structure reports or preservation plans.
Yes, it could include that. Those are a little tricky sometimes because sometimes we see proposals for those and we sometimes realize that those aren't actually needed in that instance, but it would actually be money better spent to simply just hire the engineer or to hire the architect, right? To work with our office to help interpret the standards to do a good job by the building. Sometimes we worry that some of the HSRs end up on a shelf somewhere and they're not actually implemented for years, and then by the time they're implemented, the goals of the project change, and half of what is in the HSR doesn't ever have it. So it's kind of a tricky one, but yeah, I think that it could be probably used for something like that.
And if funds are received and used, then are there covenants or restrictions for a certain amount of time on that building?
So yes, and a note also is that the CCHP program is not a matching grant, it's just a grant, a reimbursement full grant. And there are covenants placed on the building that require review by our office for the foreseeable future until, and the expiration dates vary, but they're pretty long-term covenants where we would have to review any future changes to the building. And those also occur for CLG grants if you do use a CLG grant for a brick and mortar project.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Okay, so does anyone need a break before we go on to the standards part?
Anyone need a break? Do we need to take a break, committee? I think we're hanging in there.
All right, great, okay. All right, so let's talk about the standards. Okay, let's click to the slide that says, what are the Secretary of the Interior standards? This is review, I'm sure this is a review of some of this basic information, but just in a nutshell, the standards are a set of common sense principles that are easy to understand, and they talk about how best to treat your historic building in terms of maintaining it or repairing it or potentially replacing some of the materials. And it addresses very simple concepts, including some things like new additions and what have you. So it's just a common sense principles. So the next slide, why are the standards necessary? Well, sometimes they are legally required. Some federal undertakings through the Section 106 process have to follow the standards. If we're giving you grant money for a project, that project has to follow the standards. If we have a covenant, then future things have to follow the standards. If a property is seeking federal tax credits, they have to follow the standards. So like I say, sometimes they're legally required. The standards are necessary because they essentially create a common language that goes across disciplines, and it goes from any town or any agency. They all are going to follow the same set of standards, so there's no confusion. And they're consistent, so that, again, like I say, even though they sometimes can be seen as having a little bit of gray area, they're very plain and, in my opinion, easy to understand, and so they try to remove some of that subjectivity. And then they're good for long-term planning. So, making a decision, if you try to consistently make decisions based on the standards, it tends to take the longer view toward preserving that building and those building materials. So next slide. What do the standards cover? Well, of course, all types of historic resources, like even sites and objects and structures, not just buildings. The standards do cover interiors as well as exteriors, and again, that sometimes can vary in the level of strictness depending on what triggers use of the standards and how they're being used for what purpose. And the standards also cover the building setting, such as its outbuildings or its landscape or its general site. So next slide. A lot of people don't know that there's actually 4 different sets of standards. And each set of standards is a certain treatment strategy for how to work with a historic building. So we have a set of standards for preservation, rehabilitation, restoration, and reconstruction. And I'll touch on 3 of those briefly, and then I'll touch on the last one in more length. So the next slide, how do you know which of those 4 approaches is right for your building or your project? The answer, of course, is everything. It depends. It depends on what the resource is. How significant is that resource? Is that resource significant for its architectural merit, or maybe it's only significant for its history? What is the integrity level of that resource? Is it pristine, never been altered, or is it pretty already heavily altered? What are you going to use that building for? Are you going to turn it into a different use, adaptively reuse the building? And what are your needs? What are the financial constraints, or what does the public input say? That kind of thing. So you can either select one overall approach, one set of standards, or it's totally okay to mix different approaches for maybe different parts of the building. So the next slide. The set of standards for reconstruction is used when a resource is no longer present. You can reconstruct a building when the documentation for the missing resource is really tight and you have really good photo documentation and drawings so that you know exactly how that building was built historically, and you can reconstruct it exactly. And if you don't have that documentation, you should not be attempting a historic reconstruction, because one of the standards in reconstruction says, it says, don't guess. Don't say, well, we don't know what this was like, but it was probably like this because that's what buildings look like back then. That is not what you do. So this picture is actually interesting because both of those buildings are reconstructions. One, they had really good documentation for, and they were able to reconstruct it as it was historically, but then they needed to provide public interpretation to indicate that there was another building on the site, because the only way to understand that site is, as a complex. So they had to do kind of a cubist, I guess, reconstruction there, because they did not have the right type of documentation. So reconstruction is not used very often, and it's kind of controversial. So you would really just need to use it for like a museum environment or something for interpretive purposes, and you would have to label it carefully so no one would think it was actually a historic building. So next slide. So there's also the set of standards for restoration, and that's when you want to depict the building as it was in a certain time period. So it's usually used when the resource is pretty well preserved already, or when it's generally well preserved, but you can easily take it back to a certain point in time based on documentation and photos and stuff. There should be a clear period of significance for the building, so there's no confusion about why you're restoring it to a certain time period. And this is another one where it's often interpretive in nature. This could be, again, really useful for a house museum or something, when you want to restore it to a certain time period when a certain person lived there. So the next slide, the set of standards for preservation. This is kind of like preserving in place. This is a building that is in, again, pretty good shape with a pretty good level of not only condition, but also integrity. It has a strong level of integrity, and you want to just preserve the building. You don't want it to deteriorate. You want to make it in good condition with the roof and, seal it and the paint job, and you want to maybe fix a few things here and there, and you preserve it how it is. So this is best when the new use is passive in some way. It's not an adaptive reuse project where you're turning that house right there into a hotel or something. Finally, the next slide is the most commonly used set of standards, and that's the standards for rehabilitation. So rehabilitation makes a compatible use possible. So this is the set of standards that you are going to use if you have an adaptive reuse project, like the Mob Museum here, where you're finding a new use but fitting it into a historic building. Or simply if it's a building that someone is going to live in, for example, but maybe they need to upgrade the HVAC and they need a better kitchen, or they need a small addition for a new bathroom or something like that. Those type of projects would use the set of standards for rehabilitation. So you are still preserving the cultural significance and the character defining features and that architectural value, but you're making some alterations and some repairs and even potentially some small additions. So that's rehab. So the next slide, why would you use rehab? I kind of already talked about all this. An adaptive reuse project, that would be a really good reason to use rehab, adapting to new technology or to new needs. If a building has a little bit of loss of integrity and you do have to make some changes because stuff is missing, if you need to do additions or other alterations, or if you do need to replace some historic building materials because of maybe safety concerns or seismic reinforcing or fire concerns or code concerns, or have to make a building accessible or what have you, that means rehabilitation is probably the one you need. So the next slide. So there are 10 standards in the set of standards for rehabilitation. Number 1 says it will be used as it was historically, or it'll be given a new use that requires minimal change to its distinctive features. So a good example of this would be, say you have a bank building or a ballroom that has historically always been one cavernous open space. Well, the new use should also function in one cavernous open space. You would not compartmentalize that for the new use. That would not meet the standards. So number 2, next slide. The historic character will be retained and preserved. Don't remove distinctive materials. Don't alter any features or spaces that characterize the property. So the example here, what are the character-defining features of a building? In this example, someone has removed this projecting bay that was supposed to be a 2-story bay, and then they've created this very boxy 3-story bay. Well, that obviously, not only did it remove a character-defining feature, but it wrecked the whole spatial relationship of the facade of the building. So next slide, number 3. Okay, the property will be recognized as a record of its time, place, and use. Changes that create a false sense of history, such as adding a conjectural feature, will not be undertaken. So this is the don't create a false sense of history standard. So this is the don't make it Disney standard, essentially. We don't want to say, oh, well, let's put some Victorian gingerbread on this porch because old houses are cool and it makes it look like a cool old house if it has Victorian gingerbread, if it didn't ever have that gingerbread in the first place. That's kind of what this standard is saying. So number 4, next one. But, this is kind of a but, changes to a property that have acquired significance in their own right should be retained and preserved. So a building has sometimes a very long period of significance, where if a building was built in the 1940s here, for example, well, it had an interesting history over the course of its early decades, and this remodel that occurred to the El Cortez in the 1950s to add this fabulous neon sign, well, that falls within the period of significance for this building. And so those changes have now acquired significance in their own right, and they should not be removed any more than the 1941 parts should be removed. So number 5, distinctive materials, features, finishes, and techniques or examples of craftsmanship will be preserved. So this is self-explanatory. Of course, we're not going to not keep fabulous stonework or woodwork or that kind of thing. We don't want to cover it up. We don't want to sheathe it. We don't want to take it off, and we don't want to alter it. Next slide, standard number 6. This is the biggie. You have to repair rather than replace, of course. This is a really common one that comes up over and over again. You have to repair rather than replace. However, when the severity of deterioration means that you cannot repair it and that you have to replace it, you should replace it with a new feature that matches the old one in design, color, texture, and, where possible, materials. Again, with documentary evidence to guide you. And notice that it says where possible materials. It's somewhat leaving that open, that there might be some replacement materials that could work in certain circumstances. Wood consolidant is a great example of this. If there's a deteriorated piece of wood and you realize that you don't necessarily need to replace the entire raptor tail, or maybe you don't even need to do a big Dutchman repair with a hunk of wood. Maybe it just is slightly deteriorated where you can actually just repair it using a wood consolidant epoxy that can be sanded and painted because the thing's going to be painted anyway. So there are times in which substitute materials can be appropriate. So number 7. This is the cleaning standard. Clean using the gentlest means possible. Don't have treatments that damage historic materials. So that means, no high pressure water, no sandblasting, no grinding or anything like that. We want to see steam and water, and we want to see gentle scrub brushes and mild detergents and that kind of thing. So number 8, next standard, is about archaeology. It says you should preserve and protect archaeological resources in place. You generally do not want to remove them from the ground. Now, if you have to remove them from the ground because someone's about to build a highway through them, then there are certain steps that you need to take to document those resources properly and to put them in some sort of collection or whatever the mitigation ends up being for that. But generally, you need to leave the archaeological resources where they are.
Michael, I've got a question.
Okay.
Oh, good. I didn't know I knew my mic wasn't on. This is Susan, the city planner. I was always curious about standard number 8 because there's nothing in our nomination to the National Register that really mentions anything about archaeological resources. So when the city and committee are supposed to use these standards for review of, any proposed rehabilitation in our historic district, what are we supposed to do with regard to standard number 8? Do we just assume it is not applicable? I mean, because it's not like we're going to expect a homeowner or a business person to hire an archaeologist to go excavating their site to see if, there might be something underground that isn't visible.
Right. Yeah, I think you're actually right there, that you generally would assume that it doesn't apply to you guys. If someone's going to be doing a project that involves digging or something in a previously undisturbed area, then that might come into play. But if it's a disturbed area where there's been paving and grading and utilities and landscaping and all these kinds of things already happen, then not only is the ground already disturbed, but if all you're doing is working on the house, maybe putting in a new driveway or something, it seems like that would not necessarily be triggered. Again, if you do have a project that involves digging a big hole, then yes, it might be triggered. But I think this one is meant to be more for known archaeological resources. If someone is a steward of them, it's just sort of telling them the right thing to do.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Any archaeologists in the crowd want to chime in about that?
Steward.
Okay. Okay, so great. Number 9. Number 9 is about new additions and new construction. So any new construction or exterior alterations, including additions, should not destroy any historic building materials, building features, or spatial relationships. You should differentiate the new work from the old, yet the new work should be compatible. So it should be compatible in terms of materials, features, size, scale, massing, proportion, that kind of thing. That will help protect the overall integrity of the building and the site and the streetscape and the district. Because it'll kind of go, in other words, with it, but it should definitely be differentiated. And that goes back to that earlier standard about not creating a false sense of history. You don't want that addition to look like it's always been there. Question?
Yep, I've got a question about that. Relative to standard 6, in terms of you should, as you said, always repair rather than replace. Obviously, that's with regard to the existing historic resources. And you said you're not supposed to create that false sense of history. So for new construction, if somebody's doing an addition, and as you said, it's supposed to be differentiated from the original construction, but still compatible, I guess I'm curious as to where that line is. For instance, if the original house, let's say, has wood windows, is the owner supposed to try to match as closely as possible? Like, suppose we have some cases here where people say, oh, so-and-so on another street you know, they were doing a remodel and they got rid of their old windows and they gave them to me. So I'm going to put those old windows on my new addition. And they're all thrilled because in their minds, you know, they may actually be trying to make it look exactly like the house
Right.
that is there. But would that technically be violating the premise that you're not supposed to make new construction actually look like it was original? Because that would be a false, attempt.
Right. That's a really good question. So I think that you hit the nail on the head when you call it a fine line. Now, you simply salvaging historic windows and incorporating those old windows into the design of the addition, in and of itself, there's certainly nothing wrong with that. And old windows are great and they last forever. So if they found some old windows, bonus, right? It's the design of the whole, though. So if they are trying to make the addition look like the historic building, then that would have taken it too far because it would have created that false sense of history. So I would say try to, I can't even think of an example, but if there was a wood frame house, say, that had horizontal siding, wood windows, a front gabled roof, and maybe the windows on the front elevation were paired and on the side elevation they were single, and it had a one-story front porch. Now, if someone wanted to build an addition, we would want to see, a lower, if possible, lower scale than the main house, so the addition is not looming over the top and dwarfing the house, so the scale and the massing would have to be appropriate toward the back so that it would not be maybe visible from the front or from all sides at least. Then we would want to see some of those features echoed in the addition: wood siding, horizontal fenestration pattern that's relatively similar to the spacing of the windows, maybe mimicking the roof shape. And that would be about it. But we would not want to see like all of the detail work and all of the exact everything as the new house. There would be a way to make it like this one in the slide. I mean, there's that hyphen, that glass connector piece that separates the addition, but the addition it kind of mimics in a way that Art Deco look in terms of its massing and its materials, but it is obviously not the same as the original building. And the same thing can be achieved even with a simple little house, with just something very understated, but that uses similar materials. So I think it is just a fine line, and it totally depends on what kind of building it is and what the architecture is. They don't have to use wood windows, though. If that's the other part of your question. If the homeowner wants to do a really simple addition, and they want to have just some other types of windows, as long as they're compatible with the neighborhood and with the house, that's fine. The addition doesn't have to use all of the same building materials.
Thanks, that helps.
Okay. I hate to say it's a case-by-case basis, but it really is.
Yeah, and I get the impression that down the road, if our code ever becomes something other than just advisory, and it gets to the point where actual certificates of appropriateness have to be granted, we may need to have some additional consultant experience make those determinations.
Sure, or you could have a very simple design guidelines with a couple of chapters that were tailored, maybe a chapter for commercial and a chapter for residential, that kind of just call out some of those common things that you see over and over again, like additions and windows and fences or, what have you, that you end up seeing a lot. And those could just spell those out a little bit more so that the building owners wouldn't feel that it was subjective, that they could see it in writing and it was posted on your website. And that's the route a lot of cities take, just to kind of take the confusion and the argument out of it.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so last standard, next one, number 10. This is the reversibility standard. So any new construction should be basically reversible. If you remove it in the future, the original building and its materials and its form would not be irreversibly altered. So that's the reversibility standard. So just a few more, let's see. Next slide is some common things that we see a lot, and I will go through them quickly. We have windows, primary elevations, interior plans and hallways and such, interior features and finishes, new construction such as additions, and then we also see a lot of questions about accessibility and codes. So the next couple slides are about windows. The next slide, retain and repair, of course. Windows that are in a repairable condition should never be replaced. And a repairable condition, I mean, an old wood window is generally made out of really nice wood, and it's so unusual to see one that is deteriorated beyond repair. The vast majority of times, people say they're deteriorated beyond repair, and they're actually not. They can certainly be repaired, so just keep that in mind. There's some examples of some repair techniques. We have some wood consolidant, epoxy type stuff, filling in some deteriorated chunks, and then below that we have actually splicing in new wood at a corner. And also you get a lot of questions about energy efficiency. People say, well, I have to replace my windows because these are single pane windows, these old ones. Well, that's not actually the case. And let me see if I do have a slide about that a little bit later in a few about efficiency. But the truth of the matter is that very little of your heat loss occurs through the glass of the window or the air conditioner loss in your climate, I suppose. Very little of that actually happens through the glass of the window. Old windows are drafty because they're not seated right, and because they're in disrepair, and because they need to be repaired and hung properly, and often because they need to be caulked and weather stripped. Because they're just rattling around. And so we can talk to people about those approaches and about increasing efficiency by things like solar screens or storm windows. Finally, repairing is actually usually cheaper because if you're trying to replace your window and you want to replace it in kind to meet the standards, that usually means a custom-made wood window, and those are extremely expensive. So the next slide. If you do have to replace a window, how do you do it? You really have to be careful because a lot of times the proportions and the very fine details of the design are not the same. We certainly don't want to see any materials like vinyl windows, obviously, but even with nice wood windows, the profiles and the moldings and the thickness of the muntins or the thickness of the sash itself is often not appropriate for the historic building. And so that's why I say that it ends up having to be a custom window part of the time, and those just get really expensive. And you don't want to truncate a window opening to put in a smaller window because that's all Home Depot had on the shelf. You have to actually the size of the window has to be the size of the new window. So next slide. So in terms of interior, we really look to see, and this is, again, like I say, how much you look at interior depends on what your application is. A city preservation ordinance for a residential property is generally not concerned with interior, but for a public building, maybe. And certainly for a historic tax credit project, if my office was reviewing a tax credit project, or if we were reviewing a grant-funded project, we also would be looking at interior. And the types of things that we're looking at are the main public spaces, like circulation networks. And those are often things that people want to change. They want to chop them up. So we want to retain historic circulation networks. We don't want to chop up any big open public spaces, lower ceilings, any of those character-defining features of that historic public space should remain, and obviously avoid destruction of historic materials. And if you need to put in some HVAC or some new electrical, we like to see that go into the secondary spaces, like the utilitarian areas. Next slide is about historic features and finishes on the interior. This kind of applies to the outside as well, of course. You want to preserve anything that's historic. You want to replace it in kind if you can't repair it. And then sometimes you can even do some investigation, like on the right, to realize that there was actually a historic finish that's been hidden by maybe some plaster or some paneling or something, and that you realize that it was actually tile to begin with, as in that picture. And then that do not create a false sense of history applies to the interior as well. If the building was historically plastered with a smooth finish, then it's not appropriate to have exposed brick to make it look like a loft, because it was not supposed to have exposed brick in the first place. So the next slide, additions. First, we have to ask if the building can even accommodate an addition. Sometimes it literally can't, because maybe it can't accommodate a rooftop one because the structure isn't sufficient, or maybe it can't accommodate a rear addition because the lot is not sufficient or there's not enough setbacks. So if you are going to put an addition, the addition itself should be compatible, like we already talked about, in materials and in massing, differentiated, like we already talked about. And then there's that reversible again. What happens when you take the addition off? Does it ruin the building, or is this building still okay? So no additions in the front, that should go without saying. And rooftop additions should be set way back. And this kind of mostly applies to commercial properties that want to have some kind of rooftop bar or something, but you want to set them back so that they're not visible from the street, if possible. So almost done. The next one is about accessibility. So there is a preservation brief, and I put the link to those at the end here. There's a National Park Service preservation brief that addresses accessibility and historic buildings. And so it's definitely worth reviewing if that's something that you guys tend to see a lot. So you can consider alternative locations, grading the site. You can consider small additions that contain lifts, of course, ramps. Maybe the ramp goes onto the side if necessary, and if the front can't accept a new ramp, that kind of thing. One thing about the ADA is that it's more of a civil rights law. It's not a code. So the law talks about programmatic access. The person visiting needs to have the same and equivalent access. So how does someone get equivalent access? A good example might be a museum that is not able to install an elevator to reach the second floor of the museum. Well, in terms of ADA accessibility, as long as the visitor can still learn the same things and experience the same, exhibits and see the same videos or interactive whatever that the other visitors can see, maybe that museum is able to provide that access by some kind of interactive video screen on the first floor where they can walk, as it were, scroll through what the second floor looks like, and they can read about the exhibits, and they can see 3D, images of them or what have you. And so by doing that, they have suddenly created accessibility and equal access to the museum without having to actually physically get somebody onto the second floor. So there's a lot of different things to consider like that for historic buildings. So seismic retrofit is the next slide. There's also a preservation brief for seismic retrofit. This is an instance where you definitely want to hire a professional to do a report, to really do an investigation of, all that crunch the numbers for the seismic needs and figure out if you can do bracing or what other alternative methods that you can use for seismically reinforcing the building. Here we go. Essentially, this is more or less the last one. Energy performance, and I already touched on this a little bit. This is if the goal is to make the building super energy efficient, it's great to do an energy audit first so you can really see where you're losing your energy. You can think about alternative energy sources like solar or wind, and then you can weatherize the building, which I said, this it's kind of small, but you can see this is sort of a graphic that shows the most common areas where your house is leaking air. And very little of it is actually in the windows. A lot of it is through existing openings in the building that could be insulated or sealed in some manner. And then, of course, we already talked about things like storm windows and solar screens. So finally, I gave you guys some links. There's the standards.
Kristen?
We've got the
sorry.
NPS briefs. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I just had one quick question actually about the
Yeah.
solar. Just as an example, since, definitely your slide says consider solar. If you've got a house and basically, it's whether it's the front or, let's say the front of the home is their south elevation, and so they want to put the solar panels on the front facing roof. Is that generally considered acceptable because the solar panels are generally, they're removable?
I would say that our office would not go for that. If I was reviewing that on my desk for a grant project or for a Section 106 undertaking to determine if there was an adverse effect or not, I would probably not feel that solar panels on the front would meet the standards. So the question is how to mitigate that. And so, Jim, if it might not be appropriate in the historic district, unfortunately, even though I love, alternative energy and I love green things and I would love it if we all use solar or whatever, but in the historic district, if there's a giant solar panel on the front facing roof plane, then it simply might just not be the right thing for that house because it might just stick out too much. I mean, they're a little bit reflective. They really, really definitely change the appearance of that house. And in turn, they would even change the appearance of the entire block because they would be so obvious. And so maybe certain houses that face a certain direction in the district might just not be good candidates for solar panels. Maybe there could be a way to put solar panels on a like some kind of shed or structure in the backyard to point at the sun in a certain way. Maybe there could be a little, I don't know, I'm just brainstorming here. I don't really know much about solar panels, but I would say be careful with those for sure.
I would just be curious, and I understand if you might not know this, but I don't know if it came up in Texas or not, but in other communities where let's say that they do have a regulatory code and you've got your local committee basically approving or denying, rehabs, do you know, have there been lawsuits regarding that particular issue? Because people with south-facing houses, were denied the ability to have solar panels if they didn't have, say, an accessory building or someplace else to put it? Or do you know how other communities handled that situation?
I don't. And that is a really good question. I think that I wouldn't doubt it. I mean, I would say I'm sure there are examples of lawsuits about that topic and any manner of other topics, right? Because people sometimes don't like being told what to do, right? And so I would say that the ordinance would have to just have it really clear for the public process and for an appeals process, for maybe there's a fine system or maybe there's an option for, I don't know, there has to be some kind of appeals method built in, right? So how does that look and how does that work? And then let's see what else. I don't know. I guess owner sign-on and owner acknowledgement to become part of the district is a big one. What disclaimers are set up in the beginning when these people have to agree to be a historic district in the first place, So those are all considerations, but I don't know. I can't answer your question.
That's okay. I was just curious. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. There's actually a little bit of, I haven't read it, but I was just scrolling while I chatted, and there's a little bit of NPS guidance on solar panels. If you see where at my last link where I say preservation by topic, that is actually an alphabetical list, and if you scroll down to the S's, you can see a couple little technical bulletin type things or white papers or something on solar panels. So I'm actually going to have to read those myself to see what they say.
Okay, thanks.
So, yeah, you're welcome.
Hey, Kristen, this is Blair. I had a question.
Okay.
I had a question about oftentimes when folks put in an application to rehab a home and they're citing code, building codes. How do you address that? Either it's the owner or the contractor, or sometimes maybe the city is stating that it has to meet the building code. But aren't there like a number of different building codes that apply or could apply depending on the work that's being done on the building? And when do those different codes apply? Whether it's international or national or state or...
Sure. So our office stays out of building code issues in terms of we cannot even guess as to when certain needs to be applied because it's so tied to local regulation. However, I do know that there are some allowances for historic buildings, and there is a code called instead of the International Building Code, it's called the International Existing Building Code, IEBC. And so it is worth you asking your building officials if that is a code that is acceptable for use in your community, because that code might have a little bit more flexibility. In fact, I know it has a little bit more flexibility for working with historic buildings, any existing building for that matter. So, and again, sometimes the people who are interpreting any building code might just simply not have a lot of experience with working with historic buildings because maybe their main job they've always had and done is new construction. And so maybe they're just not being as creative as they could be and thinking of alternative solutions. You know, if they hear they have to have, I don't know, a certain type of door access, for example, maybe they haven't really considered that they could do it achieve the same results by using something different. I don't know. So again, I can't really answer that question, but I do recommend that you pursue it and try to ask the right questions to your official.
Thank you.
Sure. So that's it. My last slide is just my contact information.
Well, thank you very much. It's a lot of information.
For sure. Are there any other questions?
No.
I don't have a question. I would just think that, is there like a version of this that the SHPO has available for the general public? Like having coffee with a neighborhood or a business organization and just trying to reiterate these standards?
Not yet, but we can certainly, that's not a bad idea. Yeah. I'm going to write that down too. So just maybe focusing on the standards and some common things like windows and whatnot, but not getting into the weeds and not necessarily including all that CLG info, right?
Correct. I think a lot of businesses or homeowners have, questions, and it would be, I think, nice to occasionally or periodically go over these with different public entities, to remind folks about what the standards are and kind of demystify, perceptions about, restrictions when they're not necessarily restrictions but opportunities, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. And before, I think someone else had a question, but before I go on, that is also something that you guys can also be working on, tailored to the types of questions that you hear a lot and the types of concerns you hear. And so, I mean, I don't mind distilling mine down to a few slides, but I would encourage you to create a little brochure or something. Either the city do it or you guys work on it and try to create a little brochure or even a page on your website with some of that information. I mean, I think that would be really helpful, and it would certainly be right in line with with your role.
Kristen, this is Susan again. I've got a question because my recollection is that with regard to our CLG status, I thought it was basically a requirement that for anything coming before the committee for review, that they are supposed to evaluate that against the standards. So since we became a CLG, I've been making sure to include basically the one-page, sheet that lists the 10 standards. And we were all kind of waiting for this training to a degree to find out what exactly is the committee, how are they supposed to use those standards with relation to a review of this? Because on the one hand, it seems like, obviously the standards are basically 10 sentences for the most part, maybe a couple extra. And it's pretty broad, and obviously the nuts and bolts are in the 300-page guidelines, of which I believe about 88 pages, I think, apply to rehab. And that has all the detailed, all the details about what is recommended versus not recommended, be it for, siding and wood and windows and roofs, et cetera. So what is expected of the committee in terms of their review process at a meeting? For instance, we had as the first item on our agenda, review of a roof sign. Well, that was the first sign we had, I think, coming before the committee for review, even though it was technically a courtesy review per our code. So I actually did a scan through the 300 pages of the standards for any references to signs. And just by side note, the letters SIGN appear in lots of other words besides signs. So it was a really long list to plow through, only to find out there were I'd say less than 20 references to signs in there. And it was all pretty generic, But again, if you could offer any input as to what level or how deep the committee should get into, because for instance, I don't expect all the committee members to be bringing their giant binders of this information to each meeting, and certainly staff can make it available so it's here in case anybody wants to dive into those standards. But is it simply asking an applicant, well, gee, are you going to use the gentlest method, to, repaint this house? And are you going to use, wood for your windows versus something else? Can it be that basic? And is that acceptable?
So I think, let's see. So in terms of, first of all, let me think of all the different things you touched on. So the standards themselves are the key, because that's what your CLG agreement says that you'll follow, or is the standards. Now, all the guidance documents that the National Park Service has, including those illustrated guidelines, are meant to support and further explain the standards. So it all kind of still comes back to the standards. So I would say, depending on the complexity or significance of the project, there may well be times where you think, wow, this is a really high profile project and this person is proposing to do a ton of stuff to this building, and we clearly need to go ahead and dive into some of that guidance on the NPS website and do a little bit of homework. And that can also be part of this, the staff recommendation. If the staff, and I don't know how your city does it versus other cities, but generally, the applicant will turn it into the planning office, and then the staff goes through and maybe draws up some recommendations for the commission, and then prepares the packet to send to the commission, so the commission can review it in advance of the meeting, right? And it goes on the agenda. So maybe that kind of thing could be in a staff recommendation where you say, hey, just a heads up, this is a really political one, or this is a really high profile resource downtown, or they're proposing to do a lot of things to this building, so maybe it would be helpful for the commission to review a few additional documents just to refresh your memory, and then maybe put the links in there or something. I don't know if that's appropriate or not, but that could be an idea of how to deal with some of those. for something like a sign where you can't find really clear guidance, I think that you would just have to apply the standards in a really general way and say, you know, is it a historic sign? If it is, we should preserve it. If they have to change it, we should change it in a way that is differentiated yet compatible, and so on, and just apply those same standards to the sign that you would apply to the building. You know, if it's not a historic sign, well then does that sign fall within the period of significance? Has it attained significance in its own right? If the answer is no, then maybe we don't need to preserve it. And then if they're they want to add a new sign, you know, how can we do that in a way that is compatible with the massing of the building and the streetscape and, you know, doesn't detract from the historic character and is reversible, and you just kind of like apply all the same standards to the sign that you would to the building, because the sign is part of the building, right? So, and then the other point you made about the level of how in the weeds you're going to get with some of the detail, I think that, yes, for some things, it is going to be very simple and very surface level. If someone's proposing to repaint a building and they're saying, yeah, we're just going to repaint the building, you might ask one extra question or two, such as, what happens if you encounter deteriorated wood during your prep work? Are you going to repair it or replace it? You could ask that, but maybe you're not going to worry about the details for just a single family residence that is getting painted. Maybe that's not even something that the commission will even see. Maybe that doesn't rise to the level of getting onto your agenda. I don't know. But then if it's a building downtown that's going to be completely redone, then maybe you do have to have some more guidance for that owner to remind them that you should not paint the brick, for example, or that if it's very deteriorated, that you can't be, you know, or maybe don't sandblast it, or don't, you know, use a heat gun because you might catch your building on fire, or you might need to reach out and provide a little bit more recommendation for certain buildings. And then for windows, it's definitely important because windows are so significant and such character-defining features. And if an incompatible window goes in, it instantly changes the look of the entire building, and it reduces the integrity level significantly, and it can even change the appearance of the whole block. And so for a window, you probably wouldn't accept if their application simply said, we're going to replace 3 of our windows that are rotted out or burned or something. We're going to replace them with wood windows. Well, that's not enough information. What do you mean wood windows? Can we see a drawing, and can we see the specs of these windows? Can we compare them to the existing windows to make sure that they are actually a match? You know, those are the types of things where you would want to ask for more information, because that wouldn't be enough level of detail. Did I hit all of your questions?
I'm impressed, yes. I didn't expect you to even attempt to do all of them, but thank you.
I have one kind of follow-up questions on the same subject. How important, Kristen, do you think is to, you know, speaking of windows and things like this, to designate local resources and maintain a register of historic resources? You know, the more I talk to people, I mean, it's one of the issues that always kind of comes up. Where do I get these materials, and how do I get the craftsmen and things like that? And, you know, just finding people that can work on historic buildings is kind of, and materials and products and things like that.
Gosh, that is the age-old question. I don't even know. I wish I even had a better network here of craftsmen and manufacturers. Unfortunately, they just have to do a lot of research. I mean, for one thing, my office is actually not allowed to provide recommendations, and so I probably can't even really help you. But what I commonly do for people, not necessarily for, you know, homeowners, but for other agencies or cities or counties, I've often provided a list of my contacts that also steward historic buildings that I know have done grant work or have done capital improvement work or something to their buildings, and I know that they've already probably have vetted some contractors and worked with some bids and whatnot. And so I'll say, hey, I'm going to give you the emails of a bunch of people that I know that have done this before. And then you can reach out to them and ask them who they used and if they were happy with them or not. So that's kind of a little bit easier when we're dealing with, state agencies and stuff. But when we're talking about homeowners that need somebody to work on their windows, that's a whole different thing, because that is not the same type of contractors that are going to be working, on the Capitol building, right? So the answer is, I don't know. I mean, that is definitely a challenge, and you just have to do a ton of research, and that's something that maybe you guys could take on at the local level for Southern Nevada. I mean, that's certainly something that you could take on. Word of mouth, interviewing people, reaching out to neighboring communities. I really don't know. I'm so sorry. I wish I had an answer. Everyone wants to know that.
So you think it's important, but you don't have an answer for that problem, right? Is that basically where we're at?
Say that again. I think it's important that what?
No. It's an important issue, you're saying. It's an important issue that we should address. I'm just trying to figure out what issues that we have not addressed in this committee yet. And I think this is one of the issues we haven't addressed yet is, local resources and things like this. And I was talking to an architect today, and he was saying that Susan had started a project like that in the past. I don't know if you're currently keeping that up, Susan, or?
What it was basically a historic resources binder, and I think we still have reference to it on the website, but basically it's completely citizen and volunteer driven, meaning any local citizens who have found, great websites for certain, historic reproduction products, or great new windows that, really look like the old windows, or resources for your tile craftsmen or roofers, or anything. Yeah. The idea is provide it to the city and we'll make it available in this binder so that everybody else can come and learn from that too. And
I think that's cool.
Yeah, it's just that, like I said, it's referenced on the website, but, I'm sure most people don't see it, and it hasn't been talked about in years, so we haven't had any new submissions in many years.
So it's already there, so you've already done it.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's basically, it hasn't been scanned that I recall, and I suppose that could be done. As I recall, what's mostly in there is some older catalogs from years ago of historic reproductions for things that you might use on a house remodel. And at one point there was one or maybe more than one citizen in town who had done rehab on various homes they owned, and they sort of became a resource or a collector of materials from other homes that were rehabbed that people no longer wanted, anything from old doorknobs to, maybe roof tiles or something like that. And that guy basically said, hey, if anybody wants this stuff, I have it. And so his contact information is in that binder. But it was created in the days before COVID, of course, so it's literally just a physical binder in our office, and there's information on the website that says, hey, if you've got any great information you'd like to share about these kind of resources, provide it, we'll put it in the binder. But we can certainly scan that, but part of it is like catalogs from 10 years ago.
That's right. It's on the website that the information is available in a book in your office, basically.
Right. And like I said, it could be scanned, but I don't know how appropriate. Maybe we would just scan the cover of an old catalog, because maybe that company isn't even in business anymore. Right. But maybe it is, and people can look up that stuff online now.
Right. And I would say before putting anything like that on your website, to check with probably the legal team to make sure that, like in my instance, we can't do that because it would imply a recommendation. And so maybe you would just have to check just to be sure that maybe you just need to put a disclaimer on there or something saying that this does not imply a recommendation and that this is a community source list only, and that you're at your own risk by contacting any of these people or something like that. But I would say just make sure that it was something that you were allowed to do first. And then you could certainly have a research project to go look up, vendors that were still around and in business, and whether there's more and whether there's any in the region, in any of the cities within driving distance, even of you guys. And I don't know, it's a big project, but it would certainly be a really useful tool.
Well, I think the Nevada Historic Foundation, Heidi's, or I think they've started something like that, haven't they? A resources guide of some sort?
I don't know what they're up to. So there was originally an effort. Well, there was not just an effort; it actually was a bill. It happened for us to take on that at my office, and with a giant asterisk next to it saying that we're not responsible for anyone on this list, and that this is simply a list and nothing but a list. That was going to be part of one of our new program areas, but it did not survive some recent budget cuts, and so that's no longer something that our office is going to be involved with, at least not yet. Now that it's there is a placeholder for it in statute, so it's possible that it might be revived again. So maybe Heidi and her team have taken that on themselves. I don't know. I have not heard about it. So, but workshops, I just had an idea. What about a workshop that's geared toward contractors and handymen? Say a window restoration workshop. You could actually hire a professional. There are people out there who travel, not right now, but they travel and they give hands-on how-to demonstration style workshops to how to do windows and other types of things. Mostly windows, I think, are the most common ones that I've seen. But I mean, how cool would it be to have a day where a bunch of contractors and handymen and local craftspeople got to come and see it done and try it out for themselves. And then maybe they would build their confidence level enough to say, oh, this is actually pretty easy. I could totally do this. And maybe they suddenly add that to their repertoire of things that they're able to do for people. So, kind of just brainstorm creative ideas like that.
Kristen, this is Susan again. It's actually, I'm smiling behind my mask because actually, several years ago with other members on this committee, one of them started exactly that thing. And for a couple of years, the committee sponsored what they called a restoration workshop. And actually one of our current members, who's a tile crafts person, I believe was involved in offering classes at those. So, that might be something that would be resurrected in the future. I believe sometimes, I think what we found in Boulder City is that you don't necessarily want to do the exact same thing every year, because the first year might draw a lot of people and then the next year not so much, and then the year after that hardly anything. But if you kind of put it on a rotating thing where you do it every 4 or 5 years, maybe, then it's not as old or tired, and maybe you've got a better shot at getting participants, because that was the other thing is the attempt was to have several classes throughout a day where people could learn about historic tile or historic woodworking and even historic landscaping and things like that. But we were relying on volunteers to offer those classes, and sometimes they didn't show up. So, it was sort of a hit and miss thing, but it was definitely a worthwhile idea and maybe something the committee wants to do in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. That sounds very cool. I'm glad to hear that you did that.
Kristen, this is Blair again. Regarding your CCHP, I think that was the acronym for that grant. Can nonprofits or non-owners apply for that on behalf of a property if they get permission from that property owner?
Yeah, we do see that every now and again, for sure, like a lessee or something. As long as the property owner gives permission, then it can work. We have a couple of, I think there's an example of that in Reno where an arts organization wanted to put money into a building that they just leased space in. And let's see if I can think of any other. I don't know. I'm sure there's other examples, but I think that would be something that we could do. We could look at the grants manual for that program just to be sure, of course.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Well, thanks for all the good questions.
This
Well,
was
thank
super
you.
helpful. Thank you.
Good.
Good, I'm glad it was helpful. I took some notes here of things that I want to look up for you, but Michael, you and I can get together and make sure that I'm helping with everything that I said I would help with.
All right, thank you, Kristen.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Kirsten. Hopefully we can meet you in person the next time.
Yes, I hope so too. I would love to come. I will. At some point, I definitely will be there. Sorry that it's so late, but it was kind of a long presentation, but hopefully you're not all falling asleep in your chairs.
It was worth.
Thank you.
Excellent. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, good. Yeah, have
you.
a great evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Bye.
Excellent. Well, yeah, let's go on to the next, that's kind of like the basic question that we have to kind of deal with in all our decisions going future. But, okay, so for possible action, discussion regarding the Historic Preservation Award for 2020 and activities for the Preservation Day 2020. May I have a comment? Well, I feel there's a couple of things. Let me give you an update of the project itself here. All right, got in here. Where's Marty?
Are you talking about the award or the day?
Let me talk about the day first, and let me get my thoughts about the award a little bit. This is as far as I after we approved the concept last month for the program, I did contact. 100. Okay. Why am I not finding this thing here?
It's right near the end of the packet.
My schedule here?
Yeah, page 100.
Okay. Oh, here it is. Okay, yeah, I've talked to the Boulder City Hotel, the Ash Street Apartments, the Company Store, 628 California, Grace Community, 1342 Denver, and the Bureau of Reclamation have all agreed to be part of our program, that live Facebook Live thing. The only people I haven't talked to yet are the house on 616 California, who just left their address. I have to send them a letter and a kind of a phone number following up, and I haven't heard back from them. And the Park Street house, the 738 Park Street house, next to the reclamation. I haven't heard back from the landowner yet. But all of those people are excited about being part of the program in October. And my thought of, and what was interesting to me, talk to all these people that submitted these awards, these properties for awards, is that at least half of them weren't even the property owners. Some of them were just interested in, they thought it was their civic duty as citizens of Boulder City to nominate an historic building, which was kind of cool. We think this is historic, and they had a perception of why they thought it was important to them. And so I found them, really interesting. I think should be a great program. As far as the awards, my suggestion is that we, table the awards for now, not vote on the awards quite yet. And my thought is that we're at this moment here with this program can be a real educational moment of what we're trying to do as far as historic preservation, getting public input and also giving, the message about what we're doing in the CLG and the Secretary of Interior standards. What I would like us to do is to look at each one of us after we've had our session here looking at the Secretary of Interior standards, is to look at these properties in that light. So what we're looking, when we're choosing the properties that we feel should have this award, it should reflect what we feel are the Secretary of Interior standards. because ultimately, those are the things that we're going to have to communicate to the public. And if it's all our ordinance is going to be based on those standards, we have to start that educational process of what this thing means. And so I suggest that we kind of take our time, because we're not in a big rush to make our selection, and really look at these properties and, for each one of us, And that's my thought.
So as a reminder, I think Charlie, former member Charlie, suggested that our next year's awards, we would use the Secretary of Interior standards. We'd have a more formal evaluation
Right,
of properties for the next award,
right.
just as a reminder.
I think this could be a start, though. I mean, I think that, basically the awards are any standards that we choose as a committee at the present time. And it's things that we explain to people, and it's one of the reasons I want to film the people that nominated these other properties, because their perspective of historic preservation is kind of interesting. I mean, just, everybody has their own little perspective of what this means, historic preservation. And, like she said, it's getting everybody on the kind of the same page when we're talking about historic preservation. And so I feel it's important that we, get the public's viewpoint, and then we start having the discussion about what contributes, what doesn't contribute. It's my thought.
So, with these episodes that you're going to do. Your mic? Oh. Okay. With these episodes that you're going to do, are you going to weave in some kind of educational?
Well, the idea was that we would shoot these things. They're episodic in nature. So, a Facebook Live, how it works out is that when you shoot it live, there's a place in there where people can comment and. So, it actually takes 3 people to do this. It takes somebody kind of interviewing and taking a tour of the home, then somebody that you're feeding that feed to, who is taking the comments from the live audience and telling me what they're asking. So they may be asking a question like, where did you get that painting, or something like that. And so we can actually interact with them kind of in a public space, but it's online.
Well, what are you going to do? Like, it says a month. You want to do this in a whole month. So will you have?
It'd be a different episode, like maybe one or two a week.
Like on a Saturday?
It would be live, and it'd also be taped, so it'd be a live event. And we could make it a set time, no problem with that. And there's a record, and then there becomes an episode, and then it's like a record of.
Yeah.
And then the last episode, we're thinking of talking about the North Wind report, the update.
The watch party.
Yeah, the watch party with the Jam report and stuff.
Now, will we have already chosen one of these awards before we do this event?
I think we can, personally, I feel we could choose the award as late as possible. Or almost make it like not a reality, like a guess of like who's going to win the award.
I see.
I don't think we have to pick a winner now. Let's kind of digest it. We can even look at the episodes and make the decision on the winner.
Oh, you're even thinking maybe after
the last, we can make it in October, the last meeting of a month before the event. We could do it that way.
Will they vote at this, or?
No, we would vote on this.
Oh, I know, but I mean, the people that attend they won't.
No.
Okay.
But you would be part of that discussion. I mean, you could hear what they're having to say, and
Yeah.
it'd be a presentation of these.
I was wondering, are we going to be able to incorporate the Art Guild, in this, like a plenary session of maybe a couple of these buildings, like we have in the past?
I'm not sure what you're asking me.
Oh, yeah.
You don't know what the whole story is.
No.
Explain to her.
A what?
She doesn't know that we changed the whole format. She wasn't here the last
Not
time.
even gonna, yeah.
So
Yeah, we're not having an event, a one-day event. We're
Oh,
canceling
okay.
the event because we don't want to plan an event that we have to cancel. You know, I mean, with people, so it's basically.
So this will be kind of fluid.
Well, there's two ways to watch. There's either you can go there, what was thought is that, the watch party could actually be here. We could have a live audience here, for example. But it would be basically online. It'd be a Facebook event. So it'd be a series of taped events that are filmed and viewed live.
So maybe like 2 a Saturday or something?
Yeah, 2 on a Saturday, and then when there's a Friday.
Throughout the month.
Right. Basically, it's an online event.
And then with the 50-person gathering, you could limit it to 50 people.
If we did we could do a presentation.
When they turn up at that place, let's say the hotel, and then Ash Street.
I don't even see it bringing people along. I mean, I don't see
You
it
don't
as a
think
group.
so?
No.
Okay.
I think that trying to interact and trying to coordinate any kind of group activity is
So basically, it'll just be 3 people that'll be doing
right.
okay. And then, like, we would help you at the watch party or something.
Right. Or,
Okay. Okay.
okay, I'm sorry.
So, Alan, I was wondering, you wanted to bring in, an educational component to this. Would you consider, when you're interviewing the homeowners, business owners, maybe a question of whether they met a standard for rehabilitation in a, not an interrogation kind of way, but
Right. Probably.
say like, hey, this looks like a,
They probably did not.
well, I know, but you could
right.
interpret it
We
for
can interpret.
them
I think
using the standards and
that's right.
reiterate the standards.
We're
Is that
trying
your
to,
intention?
we're trying to like get a feel for what people think are important and maybe point out some things that, one of the things about the secondary and interior standards that I've come to appreciate is that things that I didn't think were that important are very important. I mean, it just, the nature of things. It's just a whole different point of view. And I think that my thought is to get the winners. I mean, when we determine what a winner is, and I've talked to Dennis McBride, and then we have one, whatever the winner is of our award, he kind of explains it. Just if we can justify it in terms of Secretary of Interior standards, he could actually make that presentation and tell why this building meets the Secretary of Interior standards and things like that.
The educational.
That could be the educational, and that would be like at the last end of the. But I think it's important that we hear about how the citizens themselves perceive historic preservation, because I think it's kind of where it starts. I mean, especially talking to people, having had the opportunity to talk to everybody, almost everybody that submitted for the award was really kind of enlightening of how they perceive their role and how they perceive historical perception. I mean, historical preservation. I think that's an important message to getting this and still moving towards Secretary of State and what we're moving towards, the interpretation. I mean,
Interesting.
well, and the plan is, and maybe this is the plan here, as far as each one of these episodes, and I would love any participation with anybody here, is to the idea is to go in and interview that person first and kind of generally script it. Kind of get, what is the story we're going to tell? What are we going to show? Kind of get a basic idea. But then realizing that this will be shot live with an audience who will ask questions along the way. So it's
So
you have
your
to be
live audience will
flexible.
be Facebook.
Facebook,
Okay.
online.
Okay.
So they won't have to wear masks. to
Yeah.
watch the show.
Okay, I get it now. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the live, it will be live, and then there's also it'll be on tape, and we can put it on YouTube, and we can do whatever we want with that content.
So is your script going to kind of focus on the work that they did and not necessarily the person's life? I mean, this isn't about necessarily, Mr. Bob Jones, who was born and raised in Italy, and he, picked grapes someday. It's about what did he do to this building? Is that the focus that you're going to try and?
I think the focus I think more is on what is the history of this building? What is the story of this? What is the historical history of this building, rather than
And what did he do to
What did he-
preserve it
Right.
and protect it?
well, and what
What's the point of the award?
well, you're right. What what they did for to protect it, what choices they made, and But I would like to have I mean, I think it kind of collaborate. So the idea is like we would meet with a homeowner or a building owner, and just go over this thing and kind of get basically scripted, and then go from there, and then we can talk about and we can and then non-confrontational. This is not right or wrong. We're just trying to get everybody on the same page and talking in the same language.
But you also don't have much time, right? You're going to keep it to an hour or something?
It's going to be 20 minutes.
So you can't go into great detail
I'm going
about
a great deal.
Mr. Bob who picked grapes of Italy. You know what I mean? You just have to really concentrate.
Right. You have to concentrate on the building and maybe the history of the house or the history of whoever. I mean, one of the subjects is, I think the last episode is like reclamation, which is like a huge story and a huge space too, But, I think that, the history is, I've always felt that history is the story of what happened here, not necessarily. I mean, it's important I think it's more important what happened in these buildings, the stories and the buildings themselves.
You're right, but the ward is not
Right.
about who has the most or best history. It's about what did they preserve and how did they
About the
preserve
architect,
it.
about what we're going to do as a standard, right? But also the story is, I mean, I think in the discussion here that we learned here, the stories and the context are important. The stories that the buildings contain are important, not just the architecture. Just like as we talked about landscaping, archaeological, the cultural aspects of this. I mean, I think that's one of the strongest things we have in Boulder City is the cultural aspects of our city.
And how they preserved it.
Right. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I think what I'm kind of gleaning between these questions, what will lead to, I guess, is what you may want to consider is having a format for bringing that draft script of ideas to the committee for, input and feedback. Because I suspect what the rest of the committee won't want is basically just to be seeing it live just as you're doing it, not really knowing anything about what you're planning to ask the owners. So you may want to bring those drafts, be planning on that early enough so that the committee can provide feedback on the questions that you plan on asking. And as you said, it'll be live in terms of the Q&A, but in terms of the part prior to that, I presume you'd want to bring your draft ideas before the committee for their input.
Okay, I can do that.
I'd like to just say, yeah, Susan, thank you. I wanted to suggest that too, and I also just want to express that I'm not that crazy about the idea of people posing live questions on such a short segment because people can get long-winded in their responses and eat up valuable time. If you've got such a narrow window, I don't see how you can accommodate questions from the public as well as all the information that the informative information we want to get out there about the award and what they've done and stuff like that. So it just seems like a short time to be bringing in live questions. And like I said, people can get long-winded, like me.
Well, actually, that brings up a question I'd be curious about because I don't know what type of a delay there would be if it's airing live and who would be monitoring it, because what if you get somebody calling in who's completely inappropriate, like just starts ranting and raving about politics or something, or diving into personal insults about what they think of that house? Would there be a mechanism for cutting that off, or?
Well, one is it's a chat, so it's typed in, and what comes in. So actually, the person is not talking to the interviewer. It is coming from it's actually filtered. It's kind of filtered through another person who's feeding the questions to me.
Okay,
from
so
the
there
audience.
is control with
There is
regard.
control, and we can also
Okay.
cut, and there's no no one can come in and start shouting something. They can start typing and we can delete.
Great, so it's like a Zoom meeting or something else?
It's a little bit like a
Okay,
Zoom meeting.
thank
There
you.
is some control over
Okay.
access on this thing.
And
You can
I'm
tell
not
I don't
cons-
use Facebook.
I don't either. I don't know much about it.
I'm not concerned about the people posing the questions being long-winded. I'm concerned about the people who are answering the question.
Well, that's what happens when it's live. But I mean, these aren't the, it's not the formal presentation. This is just about showing people showing how they're excited about their house, basically. I mean, what about this house or what about this property is important.
I think it's kind of interesting to be able to share that with the public, the different awards and what the building looks like and the historical points. And
Well, one of the things that my wife keeps commenting about Zoom Awards, she just loves looking in people's houses, where they live and what they're doing, and it's kind of like this glimpse into things. But I know I'll play around with a kind of a quick. Maybe we'll even I might even do a sample one before the next meeting, kind of like just do a test one, and we'll just do one, and I'll put it online before the next meeting. Then we can all kind of look at it and before the meeting and get a concept of what it is. How does that sound? Okay. And as a matter of fact, what I'll do is we'll set up a thing where you guys can comment on a tour or something. Just watch it live or something like that. Just experience it live and as a tape version. And see how that works. Because you don't have to be on Facebook to watch this. It's just going to be, it's going to be on Facebook, but it's basically going to be a website that you can direct person to. They can just go to that site to get the program. They don't have to be a member of Facebook to watch this thing.
will you be able to tell how many people
Yes.
responded?
Yes.
Okay. And will they be telling you they're from Boulder City?
No, we won't know where they're from.
Okay.
You're speaking to the
Oh,
microphone?
I'm sorry.
Oh,
Yeah.
no.
Did you hear me? I guess you did.
No.
Oh, okay. Well, what I was worried about was how many people would respond and if they were from Boulder City.
Well, it could be posted on the city's website. So, be like an invitation to an event. So the invitation can be sent out. People can accept them or be interested, like other kind of Facebook events. So they can sign up. No, we can't, we can make it a closed group if we want to. I don't know if Boulder City city website is a closed group. It's not a closed group, right? Anybody can join it, I would assume.
No, it's not closed.
It's not right. No one has to be accepted or anything like that. Like certain groups, people have to be, you could control it like that, where people have to buy tickets or something like that. That's a possibility too. There's ways of controlling the audience if we want to. I don't know if it's that big an issue or not, though.
Like Susan said, if someone was getting inappropriate or something,
Right.
Okay.
What do you think, Linda?
I'm just going to observe tonight.
Okay. The other thing, I think, Michael, I'd also like to suggest that we, I think Michael had discussed the idea of 2 awards with your meeting with the council, and they're still kind of mixed. I think there's some controversy about how many awards we should award. I feel strongly we should have a residential award, like a homeowner, and a non-residential or more of a commercial, just because they're 2 different animals that we're going to have to deal with anyway. And the more we can explain these 2 different animals, just gives us another opportunity to educate people. And I'd love to see a motion where we just suggest that we have 2 awards, make it more formal this time.
I think we already did that.
I don't think we voted. We didn't vote on it, though.
Yes, you did. You've previously made a motion that you want 2 awards, but I think
Right.
Michael can elaborate a bit
Okay,
further.
Michael, why don't you elaborate?
Well, I think that's exactly what I'm looking for, is that motion tonight. If it is the interest of the committee to have specifically an award for commercial and an award for
Non-residential.
non-residential, and one for residential. You would make that, and then I would take that to the city council.
Well, actually, if I may ask, the committee already has made that motion like months past. So do you need a current or new motion in order to be able to move it forward to the city council as an agenda item?
Yes.
Okay, in that case, you can do it again.
But didn't it already go before the city council?
No, I got informal feedback, and there's concerns about multiple awards being given. The issue that went before the city council was part of the budget process, and the council was not supportive of additional funds being spent on multiple awards and the house structure that was being proposed. They wanted to, look at that down the road. But then at the last meeting, you as a committee, or maybe it was actually 2 meetings ago, were contemplating giving out multiple awards, and there wouldn't be a monetary impact. And with additional feedback that I received, there's still mixed concerns about that. And so with your formal action, I can take that on to the council. But I guess the other thing that, for the committee's consideration, next month we will have Northwind's final report, which will include their assessment of every structure, every building within the district, and whether it's contributing and non-contributing to the district. And then with that information, that will help you in the decision of which properties you would select for an award.
Right, at that time, I believe the report will let us know, all the properties that, from their objective point of view, what properties are contributing, what are non-contributing. We would see that for all the properties that have been nominated.
Wait, that is just a draft report though, because it still has to go before the committee, and then doesn't SHPO have to approve?
Correct.
But it's good guidance
It's good, guys.
to help us.
And I think it's our part of our training. This is kind of new for all of us. It's kind of, we've been going over the 10 lists, and now we have the detailed instructions. And that's going to be the tricky part.
Okay, so we need a motion.
A motion
Okay.
for 2 awards.
Okay. I move that we present 2 awards for historic preservation, one for commercial and one for non-commercial.
And actually, let me just get clarification before, actually, let's wait for a second.
Can I second to say that it's not commercial, but it's residential and non-residential?
Okay, I'm sorry.
For clarification, I don't know what you said.
All right.
So I would second what I just said.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, all in favor?
No,
Wait,
Mr. Chairman.
wait.
Oh, discussion, sorry.
Just as a reminder, though, you're proposing 2 awards, but you only have a budget to give 1. And that was clear from the council earlier. So if you're proposing these 2, would the second award be a certificate or something along those lines?
So the city council wouldn't support a second plaque? I thought the plaque was like really minor cost.
It's,
It's over $100, as I recall.
25, I think.
Yeah, I thought the last, and I may be wrong, I thought the impression I got back when the committee said, let's make everybody a winner. Obviously, you knew that there weren't going to be 10 plaques, but I thought the last discussion was that the idea is that there would still be 1 winner of a plaque, and everybody else, whoever else you considered to be winners, would get certificates. So that needs to be clarified as to what your motion is that would be presented to the city council, what you're actually asking for. I can tell you that because the new plaques don't have a year on them, we did save a little money by ordering 2, but that wasn't anticipating that they would both be given out in the same year. And it takes time to get those plaques made.
What if we didn't have the little houses made?
I thought we decided not to do that.
Well, no, I'm just asking them. I know we've given that, it's the
Susan,
city
did you say
council
order
argument.
2?
You know,
I'm sorry, there's 2.
Well, the city council has reservations about giving 2 awards, right?
Reservations about giving multiple awards.
Because of the budget, yeah, or whatever the concerns are.
I do have a comment. I'd like to have a comment on
Oh,
this.
okay.
This is not that large a town, and to me, giving out 2 separate awards is kind of overdoing it because we're going to run out of resources if we implement, as far as I'm concerned, giving out 2 different awards every year. There just aren't that many properties in this town to double up like that. That's my opinion. I think it should just remain 1 award, personally.
Okay, so if we give 2 awards, then one would be a plaque and the other would be a certificate, right?
no, I think that's what we're trying to decide now. What, you know, is one going to be a lesser award? Is it going to be one major award or a residential and a non-residential award? I just think that there's 2 animals. And I mean, I understand Linda's comment, but I don't think we've ever run out of. I mean, I think it's, the reason we've had this award is to make awareness and trying to create a sense of excitement with people and their properties. And that's what
Right, yeah.
just
And to recognize those that have done hard work and
the hard work and
care.
and I look at the nominees this year, and I have,
It's a hard choice.
and I see there's just 2 different, I just feel strongly about there's just 2 different categories and they're 2 different animals, and I think they need to be recognized.
So one of the reasons, Linda S., to clarify, because we have 2 Lindas, I think one of the reasons that we were thinking about 2 awards was because homeowners, for the most part, are using their own meager funds to do the work on their homes, whereas...
Oh, I know very well about that. I did one.
And I know you won an award, but then now you have the Bureau of Reclamation has put in for an award, and they have access to thousands, if not millions of dollars. So they can do some amazing preservation work. So is that fair to give an award to an entity that has those resources available to them to do amazing preservation work versus mom and pop who did the best they could and did a great job, but it's, so that's what we were grappling with the idea of residential versus non-residential.
I see.
But
One was more institutional and one was more individual.
Right, yeah.
And I liked the idea of recognizing that the non-commercial, and it would also encourage them, the community of non-residential people, to maybe start thinking about historic preservation. Take some, maybe a little bit more pride in that. So having one for each group, I think, is encouraging the historic preservation.
Okay, so we made a motion. We have to have a second, right?
There was a second.
Still, it was seconded. Okay, so we're in the discussion stage, right? Okay. Well, seems to me like the city council does have some reservations, and they're probably going to have to make a vote, whether it's 1 award or 2. So I think we should try to get 2, 1 for non-residential and 1 for residential. I think we should try to get 2, and if they vote us down, well, they vote us down. So then we'll go from there. That's what I think.
My recollection, just to get back to kind of the extra point, is that however many months ago when you last made a motion on this, my recollection actually is that your motion was that you wanted a residential and a non-residential ward, and you wanted a plaque and a miniature model for each. And that was your motion. I'd have to go check the minutes, but I believe that was part of your approval. So I guess what would be helpful to clarify now, I hear at least 4 of you still want the idea of a residential and non-residential awardee, but it would be helpful to know in terms of what you're asking the council to make a decision on is, are you still wanting 2 plaques? And is the wood miniature off the table now? Or is some other option going to be what you're going to recommend?
I think that we've pretty much given up on the models being funded by the council, but I think we probably have a pretty good chance of having a second plaque being approved. I think we probably have a pretty good chance of that, considering it's not a lot of money.
And we already have one. We already have 2.
I
We
hope
do.
so.
Okay, so we're not short of a plaque. Okay, great. Well, that's the main thing. And then we also talked about possibly trying to fund the cost of the models outside of the committee privately, or seeking donations for that. I mean, I think you were pushing for the models, so I wonder,
I can push for I can push for the plaques too. But yeah, I mean, I don't think the models are that important. I think that the people want to get
Yeah.
I mean, I think it was nice, and when we're young and innocent in the last year, when thinking about this year's, we didn't think we were like going to be in a pandemic, and the economy would be in a recession. So I think scaling down our awards is, I mean, I think, I think the least we should give people is the metal bronze plaque, which is a nice recognition, and I think that's important. I think Linda would appreciate that too.
So then with the motion, should we put that it would be in the form of 2 plaques in the motion?
Yeah, I think that's what we've been talking about. 2
So-
plaques and a certificate.
So should we redo the motion?
You should amend your motion.
Amend my motion? Okay. Okay, I'm going to amend my motion to say that we would like 1 plaque for residential and 1 plaque for non-residential.
And does your second approve?
I second.
Okay.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Passes. Okay.
A question, so did I have to make the second? Could it have been somebody else? This is just,
I think actually for amending a motion, it takes both parties who made the
oh,
motion
really?
to
Right.
amend it.
Good to know. Didn't know.
Yeah, really good.
And just to clarify, that was a vote of 5 votes in favor, Linda S.? Okay, thank you.
Okay, for possible action, update of implementation of the committee's goals and priorities. Let me give us-
So I will be very brief, but just, this is the monthly review, and in bold, we've highlighted updates. A couple of things I just wanted to bring to your attention. The city council did approve the Dam Roast House Historic Preservation Grant, the
Yeah.
very first historic preservation grant at the July 14th meeting. Also, as I had noted earlier, we're working with Northwind to bring the draft plan and their update, the entire survey, to you in August. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. On the Dam Roast House grant, I don't know what the city council, how much did they approve?
It was approximately $56,000.
Okay,
That was eligible expenses.
okay. And then the second question I had about that was, I know we had $1,000 in that grant pot, right?
100,000.
100,000, okay. That makes it a big difference. So then there's still plenty of money to access that.
Correct.
Okay, That's what I didn't know. And then I just have one. Am I allowed to comment? I mean, it's not on the agenda. Can I make a comment?
Is it relative to this agenda
Well, it's
item?
relative to that grant. Which grant? The new grant that we got that helps in the historic district.
Historic preservation grant?
Yeah,
It's one of your committee's goals, so.
right. So I have a concern about the Cherry Lynn Apartments. I think they've fallen into disrepair, and I know that's an important historic property here in Boulder City. I don't know who owns it, but I wonder if they would be able to get funds from that.
Well, she's actually repairing her roof right now.
Is she?
Yes.
Okay.
And the reason you see all the, it's because she had to find the tile for those roofs. And she
The
found
tile?
them-
Oh,
The tile, that's why she has all that plastic up there.
oh,
And
okay.
so she has found the tile from the original tile maker, actually.
Can she apply for these funds to help?
She could, sure.
Well, I think the Community Development Department should encourage her by letting her know about these funds. Oh, she knows? Okay, all right, that's all. I just wanted to make sure that they knew.
The other thing I wanted to highlight on the matrix, because it's coming up here in the next couple of weeks, for those committee members that want to sign up for the national conference, the NAPC forum, just let me know and we can register for you. And then, of course, we'll provide you the link to the conference material. You can follow it online live, or if you choose, you can view it after the fact. And so, again, this is going to be a great training opportunity for the committee. And as I noted before, we received a SHPO grant to pay for your registration on the conference.
Michael, when is that forum?
It is
August 3rd?
August 3rd through the 9th.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to be out of town. But that's online. Well, I better not. Okay, I'm just going to have to miss it this time.
Well, again, you can choose to
okay.
view it after the fact.
Oh,
You don't
really?
have to. You don't have
Okay.
to do it live.
All right. Well, maybe I'll go ahead and do that. Do I call you to register or?
Yeah, just let me know, and
Okay.
then
I'd have to do
which
it that way.
email that you want us to send the link to, so that you can log
And then
on.
I just log on to that email
Right.
at my, how long is that?
How many total hours?
Yeah, like if I was going to sit down and watch it, how long would it take?
Well, you wouldn't want to. It wouldn't be one sitting because it's over
Okay.
several days.
Oh, okay.
And so
it's
you
good.
can pick and choose which sessions you want to view, and you can do it over a matter of months if you want to.
Okay. All right. Well, then I'll give you a call.
And you don't have to worry about what to wear. Maybe of the events.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, yeah, I was worried about that. That's why I didn't call in the first place, because that's during my vacation. All right. Thank you.
I've confirmed, haven't? I've confirmed.
Well, I know three of you had expressed interest, and so I will
Yeah.
just assume we'll register for the three of you, and
I think I'll go ahead and register so I can do
Okay.
it later. All right.
all right.
I have a question, Michael. Were you able to extend the period of performance or contract deadlines for both the NPF grant or contract and Northwind, or?
Northwind's contract, they have completed all of the work, and so it's just going to be the presentation as the end, and their obligations with SHPO, but that is satisfied. And as opposed, or as with NHP, I've been trying to talk with Heidi regarding that, so she's been a little busy up in Carson City.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
That's right. Thank you.
Sure.
Oh, yeah, special sessions. Okay. Item 6 for possible action, discussion update on status of properties in the historic district. Besides the grant. Okay, item 7 for possible action, committee discussion regarding potential agenda items for upcoming.
Hold it. Wait a minute. We just had a conversation about solar panels. Where are these solar panels going to go on? On 648 California.
You know,
I'll actually have to look up those plans because I do believe that those aren't normally routed to me. So I'm usually finding about those after the fact. So, but the problem is, as I've noted on the report here, item 3 is guidelines do not apply to this type of construction at this address. So I guess what we may need to discuss with the SHPO is the SOI standards, may have details within their recommendations as to what you should or should not do, but the adopted guidelines don't address anything like solar panels, just as they don't address fences and a whole bunch of other things. So the reason that didn't come before you is because the guidelines don't address them. Beyond that, I'll have, I guess once we find out what jurisdiction, in a sense, we have over something like that, if it's something that needs to be evaluated, even though it's not part of the adopted guidelines, then I can request that those be routed to me in the future for review. But I'm not sure that we can legally delay a permit for something that is not related to your adopted guidelines, because that's the premise of all the council resolutions that are attached to those guidelines, is that work can, and per the ordinance, is that work can only be delayed, or a permit can only be delayed if work does not conform to the adopted guidelines.
That is an interesting, that's interesting, because you now have the Secretary of Standards within our CLG responsibilities, so do you have to codify that?
Well, actually, I'd even have to look through the Secretary of State standards to see even if it addresses solar panels specifically, because if you recall, that basically came up as a discussion based on my question tonight. And an answer from Kristen is that, if something like that came across her desk, they'd probably recommend against it if it was for a grant. But I haven't looked with regard to, and maybe there are recommendations in the roofing section, for instance, on this with regard to solar panels. But I guess we're going to have to find out what the legal impact is in terms of delaying a building permit relative to the standards, which are guidelines, but like you said, nothing in the council resolutions address. They specifically state that we cannot, we are not to deny or delay a permit for HPC review if it doesn't pertain to guidelines that have been formally adopted. And another aspect of that is that when all the guidelines for the various, neighborhoods and other uses were created by prior committee members years ago, before they were adopted by council, we made sure that the residents in those areas were notified about the proposed guidelines, because it would have a potential delay on their permits. So affected property owners were notified as part of that process, whereas in terms of the city becoming a CLG, it's not like we notified the whole historic district that we're pursuing this and it might end up delaying your permits as a result of it. So there's a disconnect there that we'll have to look into further.
Susan, I read somewhere, and I'm not sure if it was in my packet, but it was something about how the solar panels were placed, like the way they face the street. Was that in our packet? I don't know. I read this somewhere about solar panels.
How long ago? Like this
Just recently.
The concern is that if it's on the front of the house, you can see it from the street. So that's the objection, really, to see the solar panels in the front elevation of the house.
Is that in that case with this property here that we're discussing? How does it face?
You didn't provide any information
okay.
about it except the address and that they're installing solar panels.
Okay.
And again, I didn't go into detail because solar panels aren't part of the adopted guidelines.
No, but roofs are.
Right,
It's just
but I recall in the past, there have been a couple other solar panel items that, since it's a permit, I note it to you. I don't think I've ever mentioned which way they face, just simply, and that's why I asked Kristen, is because they are removable. I mean, in fact, I've even asked the building official, they don't even have to like drill through or cut into tile, or shingles apparently, in order to put them on. They literally will take up, I guess, the pieces and then can install the brackets underneath them and then put the tiles and the shingles back down again. So my assumption, honestly, was that because they're removable, that it wouldn't have been as, critical an issue. But obviously, we learned tonight from Kristen that, just in term, it may be removable, but even the case, their position is that it's still not preferable. So it's something we can look into further. And it might be something we'd be reporting to you as part of this monthly report, but I'm not sure we could deny a building permit on that basis.
Mr. Chairman, let's just do this. There's some questions. We need to do some clarification, follow up with SHPO, as well as with the ordinance. We can bring this back next month with some additional information.
Thank you, that'd be perfect. Well, was that number 7 then?
That was number 6.
That was number 6.
Well, I guess it's also number 7.
Number 7. Is there any other additional discussions regarding potential agenda items for upcoming Historic Preservation Committee meetings from the committee? Any other things we want to add?
Mike, there's something we wanted to add? Remember at 6 o'clock? No? Never mind. You want to make it earlier?
That's certainly at the discretion of the committee if you want to consider that, and that could be a point of discussion for the next meeting.
Okay, well, you want to discuss it now, or you guys want to discuss it in the next meeting?
Can't discuss it now.
We can't discuss it now. Okay, all right.
I think it definitely should be on the agenda since we now have a new member and be
Okay,
nice
let's
to.
put it in the agenda. Okay, and is there any other thing you want to add to the agendas? Okay, let's have our last moment of public comment. And the number for public comment is 702-589-9629. 702-589-9629 for public comment. Okay, that's about a minute. Any public comment coming in? Michael? Okay, with that, I'll close the meeting.
Your discretion, Chair.
Okay. With that, I'd like to close the meeting. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for all your work and support.